They say for better or for worse in sickness and in health. For Lillian Hayes, in sickness meant a sterile white room, the rhythmic pulse of machines her only companion. She believed her husband, the magnate Anthony Hayes, was continents away, closing a deal that would add another zero to their already staggering fortune. She pictured him in boardrooms, his charismatic presence commanding respect. But Anthony was much closer to home. And while Lillian fought for her life, another woman was living hers in Lillian's house, sleeping in her bed, and rearranging the memories of a lifetime, completely unaware that the true queen of the castle was not only alive, but held the key to the kingdom in a way no one could ever imagine. The scent of antiseptic clung to everything in room 312 of the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. It was a smell Lillian had come to associate with survival, a sterile perfume that masked the cloying sweetness of the lilies Anthony sent every other day. They were always white, always perfect, a stark contrast to the vibrant chaos of the life she'd put on hold. For 3 long months, this pristine, unnervingly quiet room had been her world. A rare and aggressive form of pneumonia had ambushed her, leaving her tethered to a web of tubes and monitors, her breath a shallow, hard-won victory. Her husband, Anthony Hayes, was a man whose name was synonymous with success. A real estate mogul who had sculpted the Los Angeles skyline, he was a figure of immense power and charisma. His photograph, a dashing black-and-white portrait from their early years, sat on her bedside table. In it, his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held a promise of forever. He called every day, his voice a smooth baritone that traveled across continents, or so she thought. He was in Singapore, he'd said, finalizing the deal of a lifetime. A multi-billion-dollar hotel and residence project that would be the crown jewel of his empire. "I miss you, my love," he'd murmur, his voice laced with a convincing blend of longing and regret. "Every second is an eternity. But this is for us, for our future." Lillian would close her eyes and picture him in a sleek, glass-walled boardroom overlooking the Marina Bay Sands, his bespoke Tom Ford suit immaculate, his presence commanding. She'd imagine him returning to a lonely suite at the Fullerton Bay Hotel, the city lights twinkling below a pale imitation of the stars they used to watch from the observatory at their Bel Air estate. She never once doubted him. Theirs was a love story whispered about in the elite circles of Los Angeles. Anthony, the self-made billionaire, and Lillian, the brilliant architect who had been his partner in every sense of the word. They had met at a charity gala, a whirlwind of champagne and polite conversation. He had been captivated by her sharp wit, and the way her eyes, a warm, intelligent brown, seemed to see right through the facade of wealth and power that surrounded him. Their life together was a tapestry woven with threads of gold and silver. Their Bel Air mansion, a sprawling Mediterranean-style villa nestled in the hills, was a testament to their shared taste and success. It was a house Lillian had poured her heart into, not just as a resident but as a designer. She had worked alongside the renowned architect Harrison Sinclair to create a space that was both opulent and intimate, a sanctuary from the relentless demands of their public lives. The house on Bellagio Road was more than just a property. It was a living, breathing entity, each room a chapter of their story. The grand library with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves housed first editions of her favorite classics and his collection of antique maps. The master bedroom with its panoramic views of the city was where they had dreamed up their future, their whispers mingling with the distant hum of Los Angeles. But now, as Lillian lay in her hospital bed, the silence of her gilded cage was deafening. Her recovery was slow, a painstaking process of rebuilding her strength one breath at a time. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but the road ahead was long. She missed the feel of the cool marble beneath her feet, the scent of the jasmine that climbed the walls of their garden, the familiar weight of Anthony's arm around her as they watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. She had no idea that while she was fighting for every breath, another woman was breathing in the air of her home, her scent slowly, insidiously replacing Lillian's. Her name was Sienna, a name as vibrant and fiery as the woman herself. She was an aspiring actress, a supernova of ambition and beauty who had caught Anthony's eye at a dimly lit bar in West Hollywood. To Sienna, Anthony was a godsend. He was her ticket out of a cramped walk-up apartment in Koreatown and into a world she had only ever seen in magazines. He had swept her off her feet with a whirlwind of lavish dinners at Spago Beverly Hills, impromptu trips to Napa Valley in his private jet, and gifts that left her breathless. A classic Chanel 255 handbag, a diamond necklace from Harry Winston, a vintage Rolex that had once belonged to a Hollywood legend. Anthony had been careful at first. Their affair was a clandestine dance of stolen moments and secret rendezvous. But as Lillian's hospital stay stretched from weeks into months, his caution began to fray at the edges. The lie of his Singapore trip had become a convenient shroud, a cloak of invisibility that allowed him to live a double life. One evening, after a particularly intoxicating dinner fueled by vintage Bordeaux and the heady thrill of their illicit romance, Anthony made a reckless decision. Sienna had been complaining about her apartment, the noisy neighbors, the plumbing that seemed to have a mind of its own. "I can't bear the thought of you in that place," Anthony had said, his voice a low, seductive rumble. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "My house. It's empty. Just sitting there. I'm in Singapore after all." He'd smiled a slow, deliberate smile that made her heart race. "Why don't you stay there, just for a little while? Until I get back?" Sienna's eyes had widened. The Bel Air mansion, the one she had only ever seen in the glossy pages of Architectural Digest, it was a fantasy, a dream she had never dared to entertain. "But your wife?" She had stammered, a flicker of apprehension in her emerald eyes. Anthony had waved a dismissive hand. "She's away, visiting her sister on the East Coast, an extended trip. The house is empty, I promise." It was a lie, of course, a new layer added to the elaborate fiction he had constructed. He had justified it to himself, a temporary solution to a temporary problem. Lillian would never have to know. And so Sienna had moved in. She had arrived at the imposing gates of the Bellagio Road estate in a taxi, her few belongings packed into 2 oversized suitcases. The housekeeper, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Gable, who had been with the Hayes family for decades, had greeted her with a look of thinly veiled disapproval. But Anthony's instructions had been clear. Miss Dubois was to be treated as a guest with all the courtesies that entailed. The house was even more breathtaking than Sienna had imagined. It was a palace, a labyrinth of marble floors, soaring ceilings, and priceless art. She had wandered through the rooms in a daze, her fingers trailing over the cool, smooth surfaces of the custom-made furniture. She had twirled in the center of the grand ballroom, her laughter echoing in the vast, empty space. She had made her way to the master suite, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. This was Lillian's room. Lillian's bed. She had hesitated for a moment, a pang of guilt, sharp and unwelcome, piercing through her euphoria. But then she had pushed it aside, the intoxicating scent of Anthony's cologne lingering in the air, a potent aphrodisiac. She had opened the walk-in closet, a room the size of her entire apartment, and gasped. Rows upon rows of designer clothes, a rainbow of silks and cashmeres hung in pristine order. Shoes, hundreds of them, were displayed like works of art. Handbags from every luxury brand imaginable lined the shelves. It was a treasure trove, a fashionista's paradise. And as Sienna slipped into one of Lillian's silk robes, its fabric cool and sensual against her skin, she felt a sense of ownership, a thrilling, audacious belief that this was where she belonged. She was no longer the struggling actress from Koreatown. She was the mistress of a Bel Air mansion, the woman of a millionaire's dreams. She had no idea that the woman whose life she was so casually inhabiting was just a few miles away, fighting for her own. And she had no idea that the deed to this magnificent house, the very foundation of her newfound fantasy, held a secret that would shatter her world and Anthony's in a way neither of them could ever have foreseen. The name on the deed was not Anthony Hayes. It was Lillian's and Lillian's alone. A secret she had kept, a trump card she had never intended to play. But the game, as she was about to discover, had changed, and the rules were about to be rewritten. The first sign that something was amiss came not from a dramatic confession or a slip of the tongue, but from a mundane detail, a single out-of-place thread in the carefully woven tapestry of Anthony's deceit. It was a charge on his American Express Centurion card statement, a card Lillian had access to, a detail Anthony in his arrogance had overlooked. Lillian was finally on the mend. The doctors had been amazed by her resilience, the fierce tenacity with which she had clung to life. She was still weak, her body a pale shadow of its former self, but her mind was as sharp as ever. She was sitting up in her hospital bed, a laptop perched on her knees, catching up on the minutiae of a life that had been on pause. She was scrolling through their joint account, a habit born of years of managing their shared finances, when she saw it. A charge from a small, exclusive floral boutique in Beverly Hills called Le Jardin Privé. It wasn't the amount that caught her attention, a mere few $100s a drop in the ocean of their expenditure. It was the name. Anthony knew she was allergic to the particular type of orchid that was the boutique's specialty. He had made that mistake once early in their relationship, and the memory of her swollen eyes and hives had been seared into his memory. He would never buy her flowers from there. A small, cold knot of unease began to form in the pit of her stomach. She tried to dismiss it, a simple mistake, perhaps an assistant's error. But the unease lingered, a persistent whisper in the back of her mind. She clicked on the transaction details, her heart beginning to beat a little faster. The delivery address was not the hospital. It was their home, on Bellagio Road. The room suddenly felt colder, the rhythmic beep of the monitor a frantic, insistent pulse. Why would he send flowers to an empty house? Unless it wasn't empty. The thought, once it had taken root, began to grow, its tendrils wrapping around her heart, squeezing the air from her lungs. She remembered a conversation from a few weeks ago, a strained, stilted call with Mrs. Gable. Lillian had called to check on the house, and the housekeeper had been uncharacteristically evasive. "Is everything all right, Martha?" Lillian had asked, a note of concern in her voice. There had been a long pause on the other end of the line. "Everything is fine, Mrs. Hayes. Just as you left it." But her voice had been tight, her words clipped. At the time, Lillian had attributed it to the housekeeper's general stoicism, her dislike of small talk. But now, in the harsh light of this new, unsettling discovery, the conversation took on a sinister new meaning. Lillian's hands trembled as she typed in the name of the boutique, her search engine pulling up its Instagram page. Her breath hitched in her throat. There on the boutique's feed was a photograph of a stunning, ostentatious arrangement of the very orchids she was allergic to. The caption read, "A special delivery for a special lady. Welcome to the neighborhood, Sienna." The post was tagged with a location, Bel Air. Sienna. The name was a shard of glass in her heart. She didn't know who this woman was, but she knew with a chilling, gut-wrenching certainty what she was. The mistress. His mistress, in her house. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the sterile white walls of the hospital room closing in on her. The betrayal was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left her gasping for air. The image of Anthony, the man she loved, the man she had built a life with, shattered into a million pieces. The man who had called her every day, his voice thick with a feigned longing, had been lying to her. Every word a carefully crafted deception. Her grief was a tidal wave, a raw, primal force that threatened to consume her. But then something else rose to the surface. Something harder, colder, and far more dangerous. Rage. A slow-burning fury that solidified the shattered pieces of her heart into a weapon. She had to see for herself. She had to know. That afternoon, against the frantic protests of her doctors and nurses, Lillian Hayes discharged herself from the hospital. She was still fragile, her body a battlefield of her recent illness, but her resolve was forged in steel. She called her most trusted confidant, her lawyer and friend, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Reed. I need a favor, Evelyn. Lillian said, her voice low and steady, betraying none of the turmoil that raged within her. And I need you to ask no questions. An hour later, a discreet black town car pulled up to a side entrance of the hospital. Lillian, dressed in a simple but elegant Chanel tracksuit, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a fierce, unwavering light, slipped into the back seat. The drive to Bel Air was a blur. The familiar streets, once a source of comfort and nostalgia, now seemed alien, tinged with the bitter taste of betrayal. As they turned onto Bellagio Road, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread and anticipation. She had Evelyn instruct the driver to park a little way down the street, hidden from view by a thicket of bougainvillea. From her vantage point, she could see the front of her house, her beautiful, sprawling villa, bathed in the golden light of the late afternoon sun. And then she saw her. Sienna. She was lounging by the pool, a vision of youthful, sun-kissed perfection. She was wearing one of Lillian's bikinis, a vibrant heiress creation that Lillian had bought for a trip to St. Bart's they had never taken. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her emerald eyes sparkling. And beside her on a sun lounger was Anthony. He was not in Singapore. He was here in their home with this woman. He was leaning towards her, his expression one of rapt adoration, the same look he used to give Lillian. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of her fiery red hair behind her ear, his touch lingering and intimate. The scene was a knife in Lillian's heart, twisting and turning, each movement a fresh wave of agony. She watched, her breath held tight in her chest as Anthony leaned in and kissed Sienna, a long, languid kiss that spoke of a deep and familiar intimacy. In that moment, something inside Lillian broke. The love, the trust, the shared history, all of it dissolved into a bitter, corrosive acid. The woman who had been fighting for her life in a hospital bed was gone. In her place was a woman who was fighting for something else entirely: justice. Revenge. She turned to Evelyn, her face a mask of cold, controlled fury. The house, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The deed. Is it still in my name? And my name alone? Evelyn, who had been watching the scene unfold with a mixture of shock and professional detachment, nodded. Yes, Lillian. The house is yours. It was a premarital asset, and we made sure it was ironclad. Anthony has no legal claim to it whatsoever. A slow, chilling smile spread across Lillian's face. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that promised a reckoning. Good, she said, her voice regaining its strength, its authority. Because I want them out. Both of them. And I want to be the one to do it. The plan was simple, elegant, and ruthless. It was a plan born of a broken heart and a brilliant mind. A plan that would dismantle Anthony's carefully constructed world piece by piece. She would not storm in a screaming, hysterical wife. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her broken. She would play the long game. She would let him believe he was in control, that his secrets were safe. She instructed Evelyn to draw up the necessary paperwork, a formal eviction notice. It was a cold legal document devoid of emotion, a stark black and white declaration of her ownership and her intent. And then she waited. She returned to the hospital, a meek, compliant patient once more, the fury in her eyes carefully concealed behind a mask of weary resignation. She took Anthony's calls, her voice soft and placid, betraying none of the storm that raged within her. I miss you, he would say, his voice a silken lie. I miss you too, she would reply, the words like ash in her mouth. She was biding her time, gathering her strength, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The queen was about to retake her castle. And the usurpers, basking in the warmth of their stolen paradise, had no idea that a storm was coming. A storm that would wash them away, leaving nothing but the wreckage of their lives in its wake. The day Lillian chose for her return was a Tuesday. A day of bland, unassuming normalcy, utterly devoid of the high drama it was about to host. For 2 weeks she had been a ghost haunting the sterile corridors of Cedar Sinai, her body healing while her mind sharpened into a razor's edge. Each day she played the part of the compliant patient, her fragility a masterful disguise for the cold, calculating fury that was coalescing in her soul. Each night she meticulously planned her reclamation, not as a spurned wife, but as a sovereign ruler preparing to quell a rebellion. When she was discharged that morning, the doctors praised her remarkable resilience. They saw a woman frail from illness, but her eyes, which they mistook as weary, held the glint of forged steel. She didn't call for a discreet town car or a taxi. Instead, she had her personal Bentley, a formidable silver ghost, delivered to the hospital's private exit. Sliding behind the wheel, the familiar scent of worn leather and her own subtle perfume was the first act of taking back her life. The engine purred to life with a low, predatory growl, a sound that resonated with the awakening power inside her. The drive to Bel Air was a surreal journey through a life that was no longer hers. The sun-drenched boulevards, the towering palms, the familiar gates of a world she had once commanded, it all felt alien-tainted. As she turned onto Bellagio Road, her knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. This wasn't a homecoming. It was an invasion. She didn't announce her arrival. She didn't sweep up the grand driveway to the main entrance. Instead, she parked on a quiet side street and entered through the garden gate using her own key. The click of the lock was a small, satisfying sound, the first note in her symphony of retribution. The silence that greeted her inside was the most unnerving thing of all. It was a dead quiet, the natural hum of the house stifled. The air, which should have carried the clean, subtle scent of the Joe Malone lime basil and mandarin candles she favored, was thick with a foreign perfume, a cloying, overly sweet floral that seemed to cling to the velvet drapes and seep into the marble floors. It was the scent of an intruder. By the grand sweeping staircase, a pair of brazenly red stiletto heels lay discarded, a flash of scarlet sin against the pristine white marble. They were cheap, garish, and so utterly out of place they might as well have been a flag planted by a conquering army. Every detail was a fresh wound, another twist of the knife that only hardened her resolve. She followed the faint sound of music, a vapid pop song, its bass thumping softly from the direction of the library. Her library, her sanctuary. The room filled with first editions and the scent of old paper and leather, the one place in the world she had felt truly at peace. The door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open silently and stood in the threshold, a spectral figure cloaked in righteous fury. And she watched. They were on the deep green Chesterfield sofa, the one her grandfather had given her, the one where she and Anthony had dreamed of their future. They weren't just kissing. It was a desperate, fevered entanglement, a tangle of limbs and hungry mouths. He was devouring the woman beneath him, a fiery redhead whose silk robe had fallen open, revealing the smooth, pale skin of her back. Lillian registered with a strange, detached coldness that the robe was hers. It was a custom-made piece from La Perla, a gift from Anthony on their 5th anniversary. The pain she expected, the raw, visceral agony of witnessing the ultimate betrayal, was strangely muted. It was there, a deep tectonic ache beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by an immense crystalline calm. It was the eye of the storm, a place of pure, unadulterated focus. This was not a moment for tears. It was a moment for judgment. She let the silence stretch, allowing them to marinate in their sordid little world for a few seconds longer. Then she cleared her throat. It wasn't a loud sound, not a gasp or a sob, but a soft, perfectly modulated ahem that sliced through the cloying pop music like a guillotine. The effect was instantaneous. They sprang apart as if electrocuted, their faces a comical tableau of horror and disbelief. Sienna scrambled to pull the silk robe around her, her face flushing a blotchy, panicked red. Anthony's head whipped around, and when he saw Lillian standing there, all the color drained from his handsome face. He looked as though he had seen an apparition, a specter summoned from the grave to haunt him. Lillian. He breathed, his voice a strangled, pathetic rasp. My God. What? What are you doing here, I thought. The hospital. You thought I was in the hospital? Lillian finished for him, her voice as cool and smooth as the marble in the foyer. She took a deliberate step into the room, her presence instantly commanding the space. Her eyes, cold and unflinching, flicked from his face to the woman cowering on the sofa. "You thought I was dying. A convenient thought, I'm sure. But as you can see, reports of my demise have been greatly exaggerated." Her gaze settled on Sienna, pinning her with an unnerving intensity. "And you," she said, her tone dripping with a sweet, venomous politeness, "must be Sienna, the special lady from the flower shop. It's a pleasure to finally put a face to the hospitality. Anthony has always been so thoughtful about making his guests feel at home." Sienna's emerald eyes, which Lillian was sure were usually full of fire and defiance, were now wide with pure animal fear. She opened her mouth, but only a small choked sound emerged. "Get dressed." Lillian's voice suddenly dropped the ironic pleasantry, vanishing, replaced by a tone of pure, unadulterated steel. The command was not a request. "Both of you, now." Anthony, finally jolted from his stupor, began to bluster, his brain scrambling to find a foothold, a way to spin this narrative back into his control. "Lillian, listen to me. Please. This isn't what it looks like. Let me explain. We can talk about this." A laugh escaped Lillian's lips. It was a startling sound in the heavy silence, short, sharp, and utterly devoid of humor. "Explain. Oh, Anthony, I'm sure you could. You could sell ice in the Arctic. You've built an empire on your explanations, on your dazzling hollow promises. But the performance is over. I'm no longer your audience." She moved with a fluid grace, walking past him as if he were a piece of furniture. She approached the grand antique mahogany desk, her desk, the one that had belonged to her father. From her Chanel handbag, she produced a single, crisp white envelope and placed it squarely in the center of the polished wood. The gesture was theatrical, deliberate, final. "This," she announced, her voice resonating with a cold legal finality, "is a formal eviction notice. It gives you and your guest 24 hours to vacate the premises." Anthony stared at the envelope as if it were a coiled viper. The word eviction seemed to short-circuit his brain. "Eviction, Lillian, be reasonable. This is my house." The words were a desperate, reflexive cry of a man whose power was slipping through his fingers like sand. "Is it?" Lillian tilted her head, her expression one of feigned curiosity. "That's funny. I just reviewed the deed this morning. It must have been an oversight on your part, but your name appears absolutely nowhere on it." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. She saw the recognition, the dawning horror in his eyes. The prenuptial agreement. The ironclad clause his lawyers had fought so hard against, the one Lillian had quietly, stubbornly insisted upon. A relic from a time when she was simply being prudent, never imagining she would one day wield it as a weapon. "Lillian, you can't be serious," he pleaded, his voice cracking, the powerful CEO replaced by a desperate, cornered man. "This is our home, our life." "No, Anthony," she corrected him, her voice dropping to an icy whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. She stepped closer to him, forcing him to meet her gaze. "This is my home, and you are no longer welcome in it." She turned her attention one last time to Sienna, who had managed to pull on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, looking small and pathetic without her borrowed silken armor. "As for you," Lillian said, her eyes raking over the younger woman with a look of withering dismissal, "I suggest you gather up your little trinkets, the shoes, the bags, whatever baubles he bought to purchase your silence and your company, and you disappear. Because I assure you, you do not want to be in this house when the sheriff's department arrives tomorrow at noon to escort any remaining trespassers from my property." The threat, delivered with such calm certainty, hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The fantasy world Sienna had been living in shattered into a million pieces. The mansion, the couture, the future she had imagined, it was all a mirage. She was a trespasser, a temporary amusement. She shot a desperate, pleading look at Anthony, but he couldn't meet her eyes. He was a broken statue, his pedestal crumbling beneath him. Without another word, Lillian turned her back on them both. She walked out of the library, her posture erect, her steps measured and sure. She didn't slam the door. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The queen had made her move. Checkmate. The subsequent 24 hours within the mansion were a frantic, suffocating hell. The opulent rooms that had been the backdrop for their illicit affair now felt like a gilded prison. Anthony, in a state of panicked disbelief, paced the marble floors like a caged animal. He made a flurry of calls, first to Lillian, which went straight to an emotionless voicemail, then to his lawyers, a team of sharks who had navigated billion-dollar mergers for him. Their response was swift and unanimous. The deed was ironclad. The house was hers. He had no legal recourse. He was, in the eyes of the law, a guest who had overstayed his welcome. The passion between him and Sienna curdled into bitter, toxic recrimination. "How could you not tell me?" Sienna shrieked at him, her face streaked with tears and running mascara. "You let me believe this was our life. I never said it was our life." He shot back, his voice raw with desperation and self-loathing. "I said you could stay here. It was temporary. Did you really think I'd leave my wife for you?" The cruel words, spoken in a moment of pure panic, hung between them, ugly and irrevocable. Sienna began to pack a frantic, tearful tornado of activity. She threw clothes into a suitcase, her hands shaking as she realized the vast majority of the wardrobe in the closet was not hers. The Chanel bags, the Hermes scarves, the Cartier watch on her wrist. They were props in a play, and the play was over. They belonged to the role, not to her. The next day at precisely noon, a black and white cruiser from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department pulled silently through the main gates and up the driveway. Lillian was in her Bentley, parked across the street, watching from behind the tinted privacy glass. Her face was an impassive mask, her eyes hidden behind dark Dior sunglasses. She watched as Anthony and Sienna emerged from the front door, blinking in the harsh midday sun. They looked haggard and defeated. Anthony, usually impeccably dressed, was in a rumpled shirt, his face unshaven. Sienna, her fiery hair a mess, clutched a single overstuffed suitcase. They were no longer the golden couple from the poolside. They were two exiles banished from paradise. They walked down the driveway, their steps heavy with shame. As they passed her car to get into a waiting yellow cab, Anthony's head turned. For a split second, his eyes met hers through the glass. She saw in them a maelstrom of regret, loss, and a flicker of the man she had once loved. Sienna shot a look of pure, venomous hatred in her direction. Lillian didn't react. She offered no gesture, no word, no sign of triumph. She simply watched as the taxi pulled away, carrying the wreckage of her marriage down the sun-dappled street and out of her life. She had won. The house was hers. The victory was absolute. But as she put the Bentley in drive and pulled through the gates of her reclaimed kingdom, she felt no elation, only a profound, cavernous emptiness. The queen was back on her throne, but the castle felt cold and desolate, and the silence was the loudest sound of all. The fallout from that final frigid confrontation on Bellagio Road was not a loud explosion, but a quiet, seismic shockwave that radiated outward, cracking the polished veneer of Los Angeles's most elite circles. The story of Anthony and Lillian Hayes, whispered at first in hushed tones over clinking champagne glasses at a charity gala at the Getty, became a full-blown narrative, devoured by a society starved for high-stakes drama. It was the ultimate cautionary tale, a delicious cocktail of infidelity, hubris, and the quiet, unexpected power of a wife who held the ultimate trump card. Anthony, the titan of industry, the man whose name was etched onto the city's skyline, experienced a fall from grace so swift and so absolute it was almost biblical. The charisma that had once charmed investors and disarmed rivals now seemed like a cheap parlor trick. His carefully constructed world, built on a foundation of audacious deals and an unshakable self-belief, began to crumble. The Singapore project, the behemoth deal he had used as the very alibi for his deceit, was the first casualty. The consortium of international investors, men who prized stability and reputation above all else, grew skittish. The whispers of scandal of a messy public divorce were enough to make them pull back. The project was indefinitely stalled, a towering monument to his own spectacular failure. His calls to Lillian, once filled with blustering attempts at justification, then pleading, finally ceased altogether. He was a ghost in his own life, haunted by the specter of his public humiliation. He retreated from the public eye, his name disappearing from the society pages, and the business journals replaced by a void of speculation and rumor. He was a king without a kingdom, a man who had traded an empire for a fleeting, foolish dalliance. Sienna, the firecracker who had believed she was on the cusp of conquering Hollywood, found herself extinguished. The story had painted her not as a romantic heroine, but as a foolish, grasping opportunist. The producers who had once praised her star quality no longer returned her calls. The roles she was offered were no longer the complex leading ladies she had dreamed of, but bit parts caricatures of the other woman. The Bel Air dream dissolved into the harsh, unforgiving glare of the San Fernando Valley sun. She moved into a nondescript apartment complex in Sherman Oaks. The vibrant, expensive clothes she had left behind in Lillian's closet, a constant, bitter reminder of the life she had so briefly, so foolishly believed was hers. The Chanel bags and Harry Winston diamonds were gone, replaced by the crushing weight of her own naivete. She had flown too close to the sun, and the fall had scorched her wings. Meanwhile, Lillian became an enigma, a figure of quiet fascination. In a city that often celebrated the loudest voice in the room, her silence was deafening. She was the woman who had been profoundly wronged, but had refused to play the victim. She had not leaked stories to the press, had not engaged in a messy public battle. She had simply quietly and devastatingly reclaimed what was hers. Her strength was not in her anger, but in her control. She was a modern-day icon of resilience, a woman who had faced the ultimate betrayal and had emerged not with a thirst for vengeance, but with an unshakable sense of her own worth. But behind the imposing gates of the Bellagio Road mansion, the victor's spoils felt cold and hollow. The house, her masterpiece, her sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage of memory. Every room was a stage for a ghost play, scenes from a marriage that was now a lie. The scent of Sienna's perfume, a cloying sweet jasmine, seemed to have seeped into the very walls, a phantom presence she could not scrub away. She hired a professional cleaning crew, a team of discreet, efficient women, who moved through the house like surgeons excising any trace of the other woman. They packed away the garish, out-of-place clothes, the unfamiliar cosmetics, the cheap novels left on the bedside table. They aired out the rooms, polished the floors until they gleamed, and replaced the tainted linens with crisp, clean fret sheets. Yet the house remained haunted. One afternoon, Lillian walked into the grand library, the heart of the home, the room where she and Anthony had spent countless hours, their lives intertwined like the intricate patterns on the Persian rug. She ran her hand along the worn leather of his favorite armchair and felt a wave of nausea. The betrayal was a physical presence, an invisible stain that no amount of cleaning could remove. The final straw came on a quiet Sunday morning. She walked into the master suite, the California sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She saw the bed, a vast expanse of white, and the image of Anthony and Sienna, their bodies entwined, flashed in her mind with searing, brutal clarity. The room, once a haven of intimacy and love, was now a crime scene. In that instant, a profound, unshakable clarity washed over her. She could not heal here. To stay would be to live forever in the shadow of her own heartbreak. That afternoon, she made a call that would sever the final tie to her old life. She contacted Eleanor Vance, a formidable real estate agent known for her discretion and her Rolodex of ultra-wealthy international buyers. "Eleanor, it's Lillian Hayes," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm ready to sell." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Lillian Eleanor finally replied, her voice a mixture of surprise and concern. "Are you certain? I've never been more certain of anything in my life," Lillian said, and the words felt like a liberation. The decision was a catalyst. It was a declaration of independence, a promise of a new beginning. She began the process of dismantling her life, of sorting through the accumulated artifacts of a 15-year marriage. It was a painful, cathartic archaeology. She unearthed old photo albums, the smiling faces of a younger, more hopeful version of herself, and Anthony staring back at her. There they were on their honeymoon in the Amalfi Coast, their faces alight with love and promise. There they were at the groundbreaking ceremony for Anthony's first skyscraper, his arm wrapped proudly around her shoulder. She looked at these images not with anger, but with a deep, aching sadness. A mourning for the love that had been lost, for the man Anthony had once been, or at least the man she had believed him to be. The divorce was a quiet, clinical affair. Anthony, a man stripped of his arrogance, was a ghost of his former self. He did not fight. He did not contest her terms. He signed the papers in his lawyer's office, his hand trembling slightly, his signature a final pathetic surrender. Lillian did not ask for a dime of his vast fortune. She had her own money, a substantial inheritance from her parents, and the quiet confidence of a woman who had always known her own worth. All she wanted was the house, the one asset that was unequivocally hers, and the freedom to walk away. With the mansion sold to a reclusive tech billionaire, and the divorce papers finalized, Lillian stood at a precipice. The map of her life, once so clearly defined, was now a blank page. The possibilities were terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She was 42 years old, childless, and utterly, completely free. For weeks she drifted. She traveled, revisiting the places that held meaning for her, not as a wife, but as a woman alone. She walked the cobbled streets of Paris, spent a quiet week in a ryokan in Kyoto, and found a strange, stark beauty in the deserts of New Mexico. But she was searching for something more than a change of scenery. She was searching for a place to put down new roots, a place where the ghosts of her past could not find her. She remembered a dream she had once had long before Anthony, a dream of a simpler life, a life connected to the earth. She remembered her passion for architecture, not for the grand, opulent statements she had once designed, but for the quiet beauty of restoring something old, of breathing new life into forgotten spaces. And so, on a whim, guided by a deep, intuitive pull, she booked a flight to Florence. From there she rented a small Fiat and drove into the rolling hills of Tuscany, a landscape that seemed to have been painted by the old masters. She found it by accident, a small, neglected vineyard with a crumbling stone farmhouse, its windows like sad, empty eyes looking out over a valley of olive groves and cypress trees. The place was a ruin. The roof sagged, the fields were overgrown, and the air was thick with the dust of decades of neglect. But Lillian saw beyond the decay. She saw the good bones of the house, the ancient hand-carved stone, the terracotta tiles baked by centuries of sun. She saw the gnarled, forgotten vines and felt a deep, primal connection to the land. This was it. This was her new beginning. She bought the vineyard, a transaction that baffled her lawyer and her financial advisor. She traded the pristine, manicured perfection of Bel Air for the rustic, untamed beauty of the Italian countryside. She traded her Chanel suits for work boots and jeans, her Bentley for a dusty second-hand Land Rover. She threw herself into the restoration with a fierce, joyful abandon. She hired local artisans, weathered, taciturn men whose families had worked this land for generations. She communicated with them in her fluent, if slightly rusty Italian, a skill she had acquired during a year abroad in college. She worked alongside them, her hands once soft and manicured, now calloused and stained with paint and plaster. She was not just rebuilding a house. She was rebuilding herself. Each restored stone, each newly planted vine was a piece of her own fractured spirit being mended. She discovered a new rhythm to her days, one dictated not by social calendars and business meetings, but by the rising and setting of the sun, the turning of the seasons. She found a quiet joy in the simple things, the taste of a sun-warmed tomato from her garden, the scent of lavender after a rainstorm, the shared laughter over a bottle of Chianti with her new neighbors. The past was not forgotten. The scars remained a faint silvery tracing on her heart, but they were no longer a source of pain. They were a testament to her own resilience, a map of the journey that had brought her here. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the Tuscan sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, Lillian sat on the terrace of her newly restored farmhouse. A glass of wine from the first small harvest of her own grapes sat on the table before her. She looked out at the rolling hills, at the orderly rows of vines, at the ancient olive trees, their leaves shimmering like silver in the fading light. She thought of the woman she had been just a year ago, a woman fighting for her life in a sterile hospital room, her world about to shatter. And for the first time in a long, long time, she felt a profound and unshakable sense of peace. She had lost a husband, a home, a life she had thought was her destiny. But in the ashes of that life, she had discovered something far more valuable, something no one could ever take away from her herself. She was no longer Lillian Hayes, the wife of a magnate, the queen of a Bel Air castle. She was Lillian, a woman who had weathered the storm and had not only survived, but had learned how to thrive. The game was over, but her true life, she realized, had only just begun. So what do you do when the life you've built crumbles around you? Do you let the rubble bury you, or do you rise from the ashes and build something new, something stronger? Lillian's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself. She walked away from the gilded cage, from the betrayal and the lies, and found her own kingdom not in the hills of Bel Air, but in the sun-drenched fields of Tuscany. It's a story of resilience, of the incredible strength of the human spirit to heal, to rebuild, and to find happiness in the most unexpected of places. What happens when the fairy tale shatters? Rosalind Vance was living a dream, married to billionaire titan Damian Blackwood, pregnant with their first child, residing in a sprawling Manhattan penthouse. But as she lay in a hospital bed, her life and the life of her unborn baby hanging by a thread after a sudden terrifying collapse, her dream became a nightmare. The one person she needed, her devoted husband, was unreachable. His phone went straight to voicemail. His private jet wasn't en route to his supposed business meeting in Tokyo. It was parked on a sun-drenched tarmac in the Caribbean. And Damian Blackwood was not alone. The story you are about to hear is a chilling tale of betrayal, greed, and a mother's ferocious will to survive. The crystal chandeliers of the Blackwood penthouse on Park Avenue seemed to weep, their light fracturing into 1,000 lonely shards across the polished marble floors. Just hours ago, this space had been prepped for joy. Baby blue and silver balloons were meant to bob against the 20-foot ceilings. A 5-tier cake from a celebrity baker was scheduled for delivery. It was the day of Rosalind Vance's baby shower, an event orchestrated to be the talk of New York's elite. Rosalind, at 8 months pregnant, had felt like the queen of this gilded world. She'd walked through the grand living room that morning, a hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, a soft smile on her lips. She traced the spine of a leather-bound book on Damian's mahogany desk, his scent a crisp, expensive mix of sandalwood and ambition lingering in the air. He'd called her that morning, his voice a smooth baritone crackling slightly over the satellite phone. "I'm so sorry I'm missing this, my love," Damian Blackwood had said. "This Tokyo deal is a monster. Close it and I'm on the first flight home to you and our little man." Rosalind believed him. Why wouldn't she? For 3 years, Damian had been her everything. He'd swept her off her feet, a bright, unassuming art historian, and brought her into a world of unimaginable luxury and power. The Blackwood name was practically royalty in the world of finance and real estate. And he had chosen her. He'd always made her feel chosen, cherished. The first pang of pain had been sharp, sudden, and terrifying. She'd dismissed it as a Braxton Hicks contraction, something her doctor had prepared her for. She was reaching for a glass of water when the second wave hit, a brutal, wrenching cramp that stole her breath and sent a spray of icy fear through her veins. She crumpled to the floor, the plush Aubusson carpet doing little to cushion her fall. Her vision blurred. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was her cell phone lying just out of reach on a glass coffee table. It was her brother Nathaniel Nate Hayes who found her. An architect with a thriving but modest firm, Nate was the antithesis of the Blackwood world. He was grounded, fiercely protective, and had always been slightly wary of the speed with which his sister had been absorbed into Damien's universe. He'd arrived an hour early for the shower, a ridiculously oversized teddy bear under his arm, only to be met with an eerie silence. Using the emergency key Rosalind had given him, he'd let himself in his cheerful, "Rosie, I'm here," dying in his throat at the sight of her unconscious on the floor. Panic, cold, and absolute seized him. The 911 call was a blur of choked words. The paramedics were a whirlwind of calm professional urgency. As they loaded his sister onto a gurney, her face as pale as porcelain, Nate's hand instinctively went to his pocket for his phone. He had to call Damien. The first call went straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Damien Blackwood. I'm currently unavailable. Please leave a message." The voice was polished, confident, and utterly detached from the unfolding horror. Nate tried again. Voicemail. And again. Voicemail. He called Damien's personal assistant, a perpetually flustered woman named Bethany. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes. Mr. Blackwood is in flight to Tokyo. All communications are down as per standard procedure. He's not to be disturbed." "This is a medical emergency," Nate yelled into the phone, his voice echoing in the now cavernous, silent penthouse. "His wife has collapsed. She's pregnant. They're taking her to Lenox Hill Hospital right now." I will do what I can," Bethany stammered. "I will try to get a message to the cockpit crew via satellite relay, but I can't promise anything." At the hospital, the news was a relentless barrage of clinical, terrifying terms. Severe placental abruption, maternal hemorrhaging, fetal distress. Emergency cesarean section is our only option. Nate stood alone in the sterile waiting room, the giant teddy bear now slumped in a chair beside him, a pathetic, fluffy monument to a day that had gone horribly wrong. He was Rosalind's emergency contact, her next of kin on the forms, a role that should have been Damien's. He fielded calls from bewildered friends and family, canceling the shower with a leaden voice. Hours bled into one another. He paced, he prayed, he called Damien's phone another 20 times. Voicemail. Always voicemail. Frustration curdled into a dark, ugly suspicion. Damien ran a multi-billion-dollar empire. He was a man who could move markets with a single phone call. The idea that he was completely unreachable felt wrong. It felt like a lie, driven by a gut feeling he couldn't ignore. Nate made another call. This one wasn't to a friend or family member. It was to an old college acquaintance, a man who now worked in a niche field tracking private aviation for high-net-worth clients. "It's a weird request. I know, Mark," Nate said, his voice low. "But can you check the tail number on Damien Blackwood's Gulfstream G650? It's N91DB. He's supposed to be flying to Tokyo, but I need to be sure." There was a pause, the sound of furious typing. "Nate," Mark said a minute later, his voice strange. "That's not right." "What's not right?" Nate asked, his heart hammering against his ribs. "The flight plan for N91DB wasn't filed for Tokyo," Mark said slowly. "It was filed for a private airstrip in the Caribbean. The flight departed Teterboro 4 hours ago." Nate felt the blood drain from his face. "The Caribbean? Where in the Caribbean?" Another few seconds of typing. "According to the transponder data, the jet landed 30 minutes ago, on the island of St. Barthélemy, St. Bart's." The name hit Nate like a physical blow. St. Bart's, the playground of the rich and famous, an island known for sun sand and secrecy. It was not a place one went for a monster business deal. In that moment, as a doctor walked toward him with a grave expression, Nate knew. He knew with a sickening certainty that while his sister was fighting for her life and the life of their child in a cold New York hospital room, her billionaire husband was somewhere warm, sunny, and very, very far from where he was supposed to be. And he was not alone. The carefully constructed facade of Rosalind's perfect life had just been shattered, and the truth was about to be more devastating than he could ever imagine. The world for Rosalind and her baby had shrunk to the rhythmic beep and hiss of machines in the intensive care unit. After a grueling 5-hour surgery, she was stable but weak, drifting in a morphine-induced haze. Her son, delivered at just 32 weeks, had been whisked away to the NICU. He was tiny, fragile, and fighting for every breath. Nate had seen him for a fleeting moment through the glass of an incubator, a mess of wires and tubes attached to a perfect miniature human being. He'd been named Arthur, a name Rosalind and Damien had chosen together in happier times. A strong, classic name. Kingly. Now it just felt achingly vulnerable. Nate sat by Rosalind's bedside, her hand cool and limp in his. The sight of her so diminished and pale against the stark white sheets ignited a cold, hard fury in his chest. St. Bart's. The name echoed in his mind, a taunt. He couldn't sit still. He couldn't wait. Leaving a message with the head nurse to call him the second she stirred, he left the hospital and went to a place he never thought he'd need, the Midtown office of Frank Costello, private investigator. Costello was a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and left out in the rain. A former NYPD detective, he operated out of a cramped, cluttered office that smelled of stale coffee and cynicism. He listened to Nate's story without interruption, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Let me get this straight," Costello said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Wife has a near-fatal emergency. Billionaire husband is supposed to be in Tokyo, but his jet is in St. Bart's. You want me to find out what he's doing there and who he's with?" "Yes," Nate said, his voice tight. "I want proof. I want pictures. I want to know everything. This kind of work isn't cheap, kid, especially on short notice and offshore." "I don't care about the cost," Nate replied, pulling out his checkbook. "My sister's life has been turned upside down. She deserves the truth." Costello looked at the younger man's determined face, then nodded slowly. "I have a contact on the island. A good photographer. Paparazzi, but discreet when the money's right. I'll make the call." As Costello worked his grim magic, Nate was left to drown in memories. He remembered Rosalind's wedding day, the way she'd looked at Damien, her eyes shining with absolute adoration. Damien had been charming, attentive, a perfect gentleman. He'd even pulled Nate aside during the reception. "I know she's your little sister," Damien had said, clapping a hand on Nate's shoulder. "I want you to know I'll spend my life making her happy. I'll protect her from everything." Protect her. The words were now a bitter poison in Nate's memory. 24 hours later, Costello's promised email arrived. The subject line was Stark Blackwood. Nate's hand trembled as he clicked it open. The attachment contained a series of high-resolution photographs. The quality was exceptional, the content soul-crushing. There was Damien Blackwood, not in a suit but in crisp white linen trousers and a light blue shirt unbuttoned to reveal a tan chest. He was laughing, his head thrown back, a picture of carefree relaxation. He was seated at an outdoor table at a chic, exclusive beach club. The turquoise water of the Caribbean sparkled behind him, and across the table from him, her hand resting intimately on his, was a woman. She was stunning in a way that was both intimidating and impossibly glamorous. High cheekbones, a cascade of raven black hair, eyes hidden behind oversized designer sunglasses. She wore a silk sundress that looked like it cost more than Nate's car. In one photo, she leaned across the table and kissed Damien, a long, languid kiss that was anything but secret. Another photo showed them walking along a private beach, his arm draped possessively around her shoulders. Costello had included a brief report. Subject: Damien Blackwood. Location: Eden Rock, St. Bart's. Companion: Genevieve Dubois, French national. Former runway model, now a purported art consultant and socialite, well known in European circles. They checked into a private villa 2 days ago. Booked for the week. Genevieve Dubois. Nate typed the name into a search engine. The results were a curated gallery of a jet-set life photos from the Cannes Film Festival, the Monaco Grand Prix, a charity gala in London. In many of them, she was on the arm of a powerful man. But the most recent articles mentioned her connection to the art world, brokering multi-million-dollar deals for anonymous collectors. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a brightly lit, full-color reality. Damien hadn't just lied about a business trip. He had constructed an elaborate deception to steal away for a romantic tryst with his mistress while his wife carrying his child was left alone in New York. A call from the hospital interrupted his dark thoughts. It was the nurse. "Mr. Hayes, your sister is awake. She's asking for you." Nate rushed back to Lenox Hill, the sickening photos burning a hole in his phone's memory. He found Rosalind sitting up slightly, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and fear. "Nate," she whispered, her voice raspy. Is our baby okay?" Nate took her hand, forcing a gentle smile that felt like a mask. "He's a fighter, Rosie. A real little fighter. He's in the NICU, but he's stable. The doctors are optimistic." Relief washed over her face, followed immediately by another question. "Damien, have you reached him? Does he know he must be worried sick?" Nate's heart broke. The innocence, the unwavering faith in her husband was still there. He couldn't tell her. Not now. Not when she was this fragile. The connection's been bad. He lied, the words tasting like ash. His assistant said they're having trouble with the satellite comms on the jet. "I'm sure he'll call the second he lands." Rosalind nodded, accepting the lie, her brow furrowed with worry for her husband, not for herself. Poor Damien. He's going to feel so guilty for not being here. You have to tell him it's not his fault. It just happened. Nate could only nod, a knot of rage and grief tightening in his gut. He knew with dreadful certainty that Damien Blackwood felt no guilt at all. As Rosalind closed her eyes, exhausted, Nate looked out the hospital window at the cold, gray city. He thought of the sun-drenched beach, the laughing man, and the beautiful woman by his side. The fight for Rosalind and Arthur's health was in the hands of the doctors. But the fight against Damien Blackwood had just begun, and Nate would be its first soldier. The arrival of Victoria Blackwood was not an entrance. It was an occupation. She swept into the sterile quiet of the hospital's private wing like an Arctic front trailed by two stern-looking men in dark suits who were clearly not doctors. Victoria Damien's mother was a woman forged from old money and unyielding will. Her silver hair was coiled into an impeccable chignon, her couture suit was armor, and her eyes, the same piercing gray as her son's, held no warmth, only appraisal. She bypassed the nurse's station as if it were invisible, her heels clicking in imperious rhythm on the polished floor. She found Nate sitting vigil outside Rosalind's room. "Nathaniel," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of sympathy. It was not a greeting, it was a summons. "I need an update, the exact situation." Nate stood, his own grief momentarily eclipsed by a wave of dislike for this woman. He had only met her a handful of times, and each encounter had left him feeling like a specimen under a microscope. "Rosalind is stable, but she lost a lot of blood. The baby Arthur is in the NICU. He's premature, but they're hopeful," he said, keeping his voice level. Victoria's gaze flickered with something not concern but calculation. "And Damien, have you made contact?" "His phone goes to voicemail," Nate said, watching her carefully. "His office said he was in flight to Tokyo and unreachable." Victoria's lips thinned into a bloodless line. "An unfortunate complication. I've taken the liberty of dispatching a message through more effective channels. He is being recalled. The Tokyo deal can be postponed." She made it sound like she was recalling a faulty appliance, not summoning a son to his wife's and child's side. "I need to see Rosalind," she announced, moving toward the door. "She's sleeping," Nate said, instinctively stepping to block her path. "The doctor said she needs absolute rest." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "I am her mother-in-law. I am the grandmother of that child in the NICU. I will not be told when I can and cannot see my family." The sheer audacity of it, the ownership in her tone, made Nate's blood run cold. Before he could argue further, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Sharma intervened. Mrs. Blackwood, she said firmly, your daughter-in-law is my patient, and she is in a very delicate state both physically and emotionally. Rest is paramount. No visitors outside of her brother for now. That is my final word. Victoria looked at Dr. Sharma as if she were an insect, but the doctor held her ground. Thwarted, the matriarch turned her attention back to Nate, gesturing for him to follow her to a private waiting area down the hall. This is a disaster, she said once they were alone, her voice a low, intense hiss. The press will get wind of this. A Blackwood heir born under emergency circumstances. The rumors will fly. We need to control the narrative. Nate stared at her aghast. Control the narrative? Victoria, Rosalind almost died. Your grandson is fighting for his life in an incubator. Do not be naive, Nathaniel, she snapped. Every family has its crises. The difference is how the Blackwoods handle them. We do not air our laundry in public. We present a united front. When Damien returns, the official story will be that he was in a top-secret negotiation and returned the moment he was notified. Understood. The lie was so blatant, so self-serving, it took Nate's breath away. He thought of the pictures of Damien and Genevieve Dubois laughing in the sunshine. And where is he returning from? Nate asked, his voice dangerously quiet. This top-secret negotiation, was it in St. Bart's? The direct hit landed. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine surprise crossed Victoria's face before the mask of icy control slammed back into place. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice even colder than before. I do, Nate shot back, his control finally snapping. I have photos, Victoria, of him, with a woman named Genevieve Dubois. They were at Eden Rock while my sister was bleeding on her penthouse floor. Victoria was silent for a long moment. She walked to the window, looking down at the traffic on the street below. When she turned back, her expression was one of pragmatic ruthlessness. Men like my son have appetites, she said, as if explaining a simple biological fact. Genevieve is a dalliance, a meaningless distraction. It's unfortunate that its timing coincided with this medical issue. A medical issue? Nate was incredulous. You're defending him. I am protecting my family and my family's legacy, she corrected him. Rosalind is a Blackwood now. She has a duty. This changes nothing. She paused, her gaze turning sharp as steel. You should advise her to remember that. And you should also advise her to remember the terms of the agreement she signed before the wedding. The prenup, Nate said flatly. Precisely, Victoria confirmed. Our lawyers are the best in the world. It is, shall we say, ironclad. It stipulates in no uncertain terms that in the event of a dissolution of the marriage, she is entitled to a one-time payment. Generous by any normal standard, but a pittance in our world. She waives all claims to Blackwood assets, properties, and holdings. And more importantly, any hint of infidelity, proven or otherwise, if made public, is considered a breach of a confidentiality clause, rendering the entire agreement null and void. She would walk away with nothing. Nate felt sick. It was a trap, a perfectly legal, brilliantly cruel trap. They had bought his sister, and the price of her freedom was her silence and her poverty. So she's supposed to just accept this, welcome him back with open arms while he has a mistress in the Caribbean. She will do what is necessary to secure her future and the future of her child, Victoria stated. The Blackwood name provides a life of privilege and protection. Arthur is a Blackwood. He will be raised as one. Rosalind is his mother. She will be well cared for as long as she is sensible. The threat was unmistakable. Play along or be cast out and left with nothing, not even the resources to fight for her own son. The Blackwood Wall wasn't just about controlling the press. It was about controlling people. It was a fortress of money, power, and lawyers, and they had just surrounded his sister. As Victoria turned to leave, her composure absolute, she delivered one final chilling remark. For what it's worth, Nathaniel, she said, pausing at the door. I did warn Damien that this particular girl, Genevieve, was more trouble than she was worth. He can be headstrong. She knew. The final piece clicked into place. Victoria had known about the affair all along. She hadn't cared about the betrayal, only about its potential to become a public relations problem. Nate was left alone in the silent room, the true nature of the family his sister had married into laid bare. They weren't just dysfunctional, they were predatory. And Rosalind, waking up to a world of pain and fear, had no idea she was sleeping in the lion's den. The haze of medication lifted slowly, peeling back layers of pain to reveal a stark new reality. Rosalind's first lucid thoughts were of her baby, Arthur. Nate had been her rock, his constant presence a comfort, his reassurances about the baby a lifeline. But she needed to see for herself. Against the doctor's initial advice, she insisted. Bundled into a wheelchair, Nate pushing her, they made the solemn journey to the neonatal intensive care unit. The scene inside was a surreal landscape of quiet urgency. The soft chime of monitors, the low hum of ventilators, the hushed voices of nurses. And there, in a clear plastic box, was Arthur. He was so much smaller than she had ever imagined. His skin was translucent, a web of tiny blue veins visible beneath. A feeding tube was taped to his cheek, and monitors tracked every precious breath and heartbeat. Rosalind pressed her hand against the incubator, tears streaming down her face. He was so perfect, so fragile. A wave of love so fierce and primal it stole her breath, washed over her. "He's beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He's a fighter," Nate said softly, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Just like his mom." The sight of her son, so vulnerable and yet so determined to live, ignited something in Rosalind. The weakness and confusion began to recede, replaced by a crystalline, sharp-edged resolve. She was a mother, his protector. Back in her room, the second part of her new reality had to be faced. "Damien," she said, her voice stronger now. "Tell me the truth, Nate. No more lies about bad connections. Where is he?" Nate hesitated, his expression pained. He had hoped to shield her for longer, but he saw the new strength in her eyes. She deserved the truth. He sat down, took a deep breath, and told her everything. He told her about the jet to St. Bart's. He told her about Frank Costello, the private investigator. And then, his voice gentle, he showed her the photos on his phone. Rosalind stared at the images, her face a mask of disbelief. The laughing man on the screen was her husband, but it was also a stranger. The casual intimacy with the beautiful raven-haired woman was a physical blow. Each photo was a dagger methodically dismantling the entire foundation of her marriage. The loving phone calls, the promises, the Tokyo deal. It was all a lie. A carefully crafted illusion to cover a sordid, sun-drenched escape. She didn't cry. The tears she'd shed for her son had been born of love and fear. This new emotion was something colder, harder. It was a profound, hollow ache of betrayal that quickly began to burn. "Genevieve Dubois," she said, the name tasting like poison. She handed the phone back to Nate, her hand perfectly steady. "I see." Then Nate delivered the final, crushing blow. He told her about Victoria's visit. About the threats, the demands for silence, and the ironclad prenup designed to leave her penniless and powerless if she dared to expose the truth. "She wants me to be sensible," Rosalind repeated, a bitter, humorless smile touching her lips. "She wants me to welcome him home, play the role of the forgiving wife, and raise my son in this family of vipers. All to protect the Blackwood name." She looked from Nate to the window, her gaze distant. For 3 years she had lived inside the gilded cage, believing it was a palace. She had willingly clipped her own wings, setting aside her career, her ambitions to be Mrs. Damien Blackwood. She had seen Victoria's coldness and Damien's ruthlessness in business as mere quirks of their powerful world, not as the fundamental truths of their character. Now she saw it all. The woman who had crumpled to the penthouse floor was gone. The naive art historian was a ghost. In her place, a mother was forged in the crucible of betrayal and fear. "They think I'm weak," Rosalind said, her voice low and dangerously calm. They think they've bought me. They think I'll roll over to protect a lifestyle I now realize is worthless. They've made a mistake. A very big mistake. She turned to Nate, her eyes blazing with a fire he had never seen before. They threatened to leave me with nothing. Fine. Let them try. But they will not take my son. They will not take my dignity. And they will not get away with this. What are you going to do? Nate asked, a sense of awe mixing with his concern. First, she said, her mind working with startling clarity, I need a lawyer, not just any lawyer. I need the sharpest, most ruthless divorce attorney in New York City. Someone who isn't afraid of the Blackwood name. Someone who eats people like Victoria for breakfast. She paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath. Second, tell your investigator, Mr. Costello, to keep digging. I don't want to know just about the affair anymore. I want to know everything. About Genevieve Dubois. About Damien's finances. About every business trip he's taken for the past year. They want to play dirty. We'll show them what dirty really is. Rosie, are you sure? Nate asked, worried about the toll this would take on her. I have never been more sure of anything in my life, she replied, her gaze drifting back towards the direction of the NICU. I'm not fighting for a settlement anymore, Nate. I'm fighting for my son. I'm fighting for me. That afternoon, Nate made a call. Evelyn Reed was a legend in Manhattan's legal circles. A shark in a Chanel suit, she specialized in taking down powerful men. Her initial response to taking on the Blackwoods was cautious. They were a formidable foe. But then Nate put her on the phone with Rosalind. For 20 minutes, Evelyn listened as Rosalind from her hospital bed laid out the situation with chilling precision and icy determination. She spoke not as a victim, but as a queen whose kingdom had been stolen. When the call was over, Evelyn Reed's voice had a new tone of respect, even excitement. Mr. Hayes, she said, tell your sister not to sign anything, not to speak to anyone from the Blackwood family. Tell her to focus on getting well and taking care of her son. I'll handle the rest. This is going to be very, very interesting. The battle lines had been drawn. The Blackwoods, with their wall of money and power, believed they were untouchable, but they had underestimated their opponent. They had not counted on the fury of a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. While Rosalind focused on her recovery, spending every possible moment by Arthur's incubator, a different kind of war was being waged. Evelyn Reed and Frank Costello formed an unlikely but formidable team. Evelyn, with her legal acumen and network of forensic accountants, attacked the Blackwood empire from the front. Costello, with his shadowy contacts and back-alley methods, tunneled in from below. Costello's investigation into Genevieve Dubois hit a wall at first. Her public persona was impeccable, her digital footprint curated to perfection. She was an enigma wrapped in couture. But Costello had learned long ago that everyone has a past. He started digging not into Genevieve, but into Damien's finances following the money. The business trips were the key. Tokyo, Zurich, Dubai, Cayman Islands. For each trip, there were massive multi-million-dollar wire transfers from a subsidiary of Blackwood Industries. But the receiving accounts weren't corporate partners. They were shell corporations with innocuous names like Aegean Holdings and Alpine Ventures, registered in impenetrable offshore jurisdictions. This is where Evelyn Reed's team took over. Her forensic accountants, modern-day digital bloodhounds, began to untangle the web. It was a classic embezzlement scheme, but on a breathtaking scale. Damien Blackwood was systematically draining money from his own family's company. He's not just cheating on his wife, Evelyn explained to Nate during a tense meeting in her office. He's cheating on his entire family. He's building a nest egg, a massive one. We're talking upwards of $100 million that we can trace so far. The twist came when they finally cracked the ownership of one of the shell corporations. It wasn't registered to Damien. The sole director and beneficiary of Aegean Holdings was listed as one Genevieve Dubois. The picture snapped into terrifying focus. This wasn't just an affair. It was a conspiracy. Genevieve wasn't a dalliance, or a distraction, as Victoria had so dismissively called her. She was Damien's business partner in the systematic looting of his own company. The art consultant persona was the perfect cover explaining her international travel and access to the world of high finance. "She's not his mistress," Rosalind said from her hospital room when Nate updated her. She had been discharged but refused to go home to the penthouse, instead taking a suite near the hospital to be close to Arthur. "She's his accomplice." The revelation changed the legal landscape entirely. This was no longer a simple, albeit high-stakes divorce. This was corporate fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The ironclad prenup with its cruel infidelity clause had a fatal flaw. It was predicated on a legitimate marriage. Evelyn Reed argued that the entire marriage was fraudulent, a cover for Damien's criminal enterprise with his partner Genevieve. The prenup could be nullified. While Evelyn prepared her legal bombshells, Costello kept digging into Genevieve's past, convinced there was more to the story. Why would a man like Damien, who already had everything, risk it all? Greed was one thing, but this felt personal. Costello pulled old immigration records, school yearbooks, and birth certificates from France, cross-referencing them with the sparse details he had. He found it in a dusty, digitized archive of a small-town newspaper from outside Lyon, France. An old article from 25 years ago about a local tragedy. A promising boutique investment firm, Dubois Capital, had gone bankrupt after a hostile takeover by a ruthless American conglomerate, Blackwood Industries, led by a young, aggressive Alistair Blackwood, Damien's father. The founder of the French firm, a man named Luc Dubois, had lost everything. His reputation was ruined, his family destitute. A few months later, he took his own life. He left behind a wife and a 15-year-old daughter. The daughter's name was not Genevieve. It was Juliette. Juliette Dubois. Costello found a grainy class photo from that year. A serious-looking teenage girl with dark hair and piercing, intelligent eyes stared back at him. He ran facial recognition software, comparing it to modern photos of Genevieve Dubois. It was a 98% match. Genevieve Dubois was Juliette Dubois. The entire affair, the embezzlement, the conspiracy. It wasn't about love or even simple greed. It was a long, patient, brilliantly executed revenge plot. Juliette now. Genevieve had spent decades crafting a new identity, working her way into the circles of power, all with one goal: to get close to the son of the man who had destroyed her father, and to dismantle the Blackwood empire from the inside out, just as Alistair Blackwood had done to her family. Damien wasn't her partner, he was her pawn, a vain, arrogant, and easily manipulated tool for her vengeance. "My God," Nate breathed when Costello laid out the timeline. "She's been playing him the entire time." "Looks like it, kid," Costello grunted. "She found his weakness, his ego, and his wallet, and she exploited it masterfully. He probably thinks this whole thing was his idea." The information was dynamite. They now understood the motive. They had the proof of the fraud. And they had the key to unlocking the entire conspiracy. Evelyn Reed advised them to hold the information about Genevieve's true identity. It was their trump card to be played when it would cause the most damage. The stage was being set for a confrontation. Damien, recalled by his mother, was on a flight back to New York, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break. He was walking back into what he believed was a messy domestic situation he could control with money and intimidation. He had no idea he was walking into a trap, one set not only by his vengeful lover, but also by the wife he had so carelessly discarded. Damien Blackwood stepped off his private jet at Teterboro looking more annoyed than remorseful. He wore a tailored suit, his face set in a mask of grim impatience. The St. Bart's tan was a stark, almost insulting contrast to the gray New York sky. His mother, Victoria, was waiting for him on the tarmac, her face a thundercloud. "What in God's name were you thinking, Damien?" she hissed, foregoing any greeting. "The entire board is in a panic, and your wife—" "I'll handle Rosalind," he cut in, his voice sharp with arrogance. "A bigger check, a new piece of jewelry. She's emotional. It will pass." Now what's the damage with the press? His complete lack of concern for his wife or son was chillingly clear. For Damien, this was a problem of logistics and public relations, not a human crisis. Victoria filled him in on the situation as their car sped toward Manhattan, briefing him on the official story they were to present. He barely listened. He'd handled bigger problems than this. His first stop was the hospital. He planned to make a brief perfunctory appearance, show his face, and then get to the real work of damage control at his office. He strode into the private wing, projecting an aura of authority, expecting to find a tearful, broken wife he could easily placate. He found something else entirely. Rosalind was waiting for him, not in her hospital bed, but sitting in a chair. She was dressed in simple but elegant clothes. She was pale and thinner, but her eyes held a strength he had never seen before. Beside her stood Nate, his arms crossed, his expression one of pure contempt. "Rosalind, my love." Damien began, his voice oozing a practiced sincerity that had always worked before. "I came as soon as I heard. I was in a complete dead zone. I had no idea." "Save it, Damien," Rosalind said, her voice calm and clear. It didn't waver. "Save the lies for the press. I'm not interested." Damien was taken aback. This was not the reaction he had anticipated. "Darling, you're not well. You've been through a trauma. You're not thinking clearly." "On the contrary," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "I have never thought more clearly in my entire life. I had a lot of time to think while you were enjoying the sunshine in St. Bart's." The name hung in the air between them. Damien's face tightened. "Nate has been filling your head with poison. This is a misunderstanding." "Was it a misunderstanding when you kissed her on the beach?" Rosalind asked, her voice still unnervingly steady. "Or when you transferred $12 million to a shell company called Aegean Holdings last month, a company registered to one Genevieve Dubois?" The blood drained from Damien's face. The arrogance vanished, replaced by a flicker of pure panic. He looked from Rosalind to Nate, his mind racing. How could they possibly know that? "What? What are you talking about?" he stammered. "I'm talking about fraud, Damien." Rosalind continued, pressing her advantage. "I'm talking about you and your partner systematically embezzling hundreds of millions of dollars from Blackwood Industries, from your own family." At that moment the door opened and Victoria Blackwood swept in, having heard the raised voices from the hall. She saw the look on her son's face and the cold fury on Rosalind's, and she knew she had lost control of the situation. "Rosalind, this is not the time or the place," Victoria said, her voice like ice. "You are hysterical." "Don't you dare call me hysterical," Rosalind snapped, finally rising to her feet. The full force of her anger, controlled until now, was unleashed. "Your son, the man I married, left me to nearly die while he conspired with his mistress to steal from you. And you knew. You knew about the affair, and you did nothing but worry about the family's reputation." "You ungrateful little—" Victoria began, but Nate stepped forward. "Say one more word to my sister and you'll be dealing with me," he said, his voice a low growl. Damien, cornered and desperate, turned on Rosalind. "You'll regret this. You signed the prenup. You try to expose me, you'll walk away with nothing. You'll never see a dime." "The prenup?" Rosalind gave a short, sharp laugh, devoid of humor. "My lawyer seems to think that a contract predicated on a fraudulent marriage isn't worth the paper it's written on, especially when one of the signatories was actively engaged in a criminal conspiracy throughout the duration of the marriage. That's a game for the courts to decide, Damien. And I have a feeling the federal prosecutors will be very interested in my story." The threat of federal involvement of the entire Blackwood empire being put under a federal microscope finally hit Victoria. This was no longer a family squabble. This was a potential cataclysm. But Nate held the final devastating card. "You're a fool, Damien," Nate said, stepping forward. "You think you've been in control of this? You think she's in love with you. You don't know anything." Damien snarled. "I know that your brilliant, beautiful partner, Genevieve Dubois, isn't who you think she is," Nate said, watching Damien's face intently. "You see, her real name is Juliet. Juliette Dubois. Damien just stared confused. The name meant nothing to him, but it meant everything to Victoria. Her face went ashen. She visibly staggered back a step, one hand flying to her throat. She remembered the name. She remembered the hostile takeover. She remembered the ruined man Alistair's vanquished foe from decades ago. Her father was Luc Dubois. Nate continued, his voice hammering home the final nails in the coffin. Does that name ring a bell, Victoria? The man your husband Alistair crushed on his way to the top. The man who killed himself after Blackwood Industries destroyed his life. This was never about you, Damien. You were just the tool. This was about revenge. She played you from the very beginning. She used your greed and your ego to get close enough to burn your father's empire to the ground. And you handed her the matches. The truth crashed down on Damien with the force of a physical blow. The stolen moments, the whispered plans, the shared secrets, it was all a lie. He wasn't the mastermind. He was the mark. The perfect, arrogant fool. He looked at his mother, whose horrified expression confirmed everything. He looked at Rosalind, his discarded wife, who now stood before him as his executioner. In that sterile hospital corridor, the Blackwood dynasty, built on decades of ruthless ambition, finally came crashing down. Not from a rival corporation or a market crash, but from the inside, brought down by the ghosts of its past and the woman it had so grievously underestimated. The fallout was swift and spectacular. The story, leaked not by Rosalind, but by a disgruntled Blackwood Industries board member trying to save his own skin, exploded across the media. It was a scandal of epic proportions, embezzlement, a long con revenge plot, a high society affair, and a critically ill wife and newborn at its center. The headlines were brutal. Blackwood Empire rocked by fraud and betrayal. The Heiress's Revenge. How Juliette Dubois toppled a dynasty. The SEC and the FBI descended on Blackwood Industries, freezing assets and seizing records. Damien Blackwood was arrested in his penthouse, the photographer's flashbulbs a merciless storm. The image of him being led away in handcuffs, his face a mixture of disbelief and humiliation, became iconic. Victoria Blackwood, stripped of her power and influence, became a recluse. The Wall Street queen was broken, forced to watch as her husband's legacy and her son's future were dismantled piece by federal investigators. The Blackwood name, once a symbol of power, was now synonymous with scandal and crime. Genevieve Dubois, or Juliette, vanished. She had played her part perfectly. While authorities managed to claw back a significant portion of the embezzled funds from the more easily traced accounts, it was discovered that tens of millions had been moved through a labyrinth of cryptocurrency and anonymous international transfers. She had secured her victory and disappeared like a phantom, her father's ghost finally avenged. But for Rosalind, the fall of the House of Blackwood was just noise in the background. Her world was quiet, focused and centered around a single tiny heartbeat. Her son Arthur, after weeks of touch-and-go struggle in the NICU, was finally getting stronger. The day she was able to hold him for the first time without the barrier of an incubator cradling his small, warm body against her chest was her true victory. In that moment, the pain of Damien's betrayal and the stress of the legal battle faded into insignificance. This was all that mattered. With the prenup invalidated by the overwhelming evidence of criminal fraud, Evelyn Reed negotiated a substantial settlement for Rosalind from the frozen, untainted Blackwood assets. It wasn't the fortune Damien controlled, but it was more than enough to ensure that she and Arthur would be secure for the rest of their lives. It was just as clean and simple. She didn't stay in New York. The city was too full of ghosts and painful memories. With Nate's help, she bought a beautiful sunlit house on the coast of California, far from the shadows of Park Avenue. It was a home filled not with marble and chandeliers, but with light, warmth, and the sound of the ocean. Her life was no longer defined by a powerful man or a famous name. It was defined by her own strength, her resilience, and her immeasurable love for her son. She started painting again, her art historian background, finding a new outlet. Her canvases were bold and vibrant, full of life and color. One afternoon, as Arthur, now a healthy, giggling 1-year-old, crawled across a blanket in their sun-drenched living room, Nate watched his sister. The pale, fragile woman from the hospital was gone forever. In her place was a woman who had walked through fire and emerged not burned but forged. "Are you happy, Rosie?" he asked softly. Rosalind looked at her son, then out at the sparkling blue Pacific Ocean. A genuine, peaceful smile graced her lips. "I'm free," she said. "And for the first time in a very long time, that's more than enough." She had lost a fairy tale, but she had found herself. And in the quiet, steady rhythm of her new life, she was finally building a future that was truly her own, one masterpiece at a time. Rosalind's story is a harrowing reminder that the most beautiful facades can hide the darkest secrets. It's a tale of devastating betrayal, but more importantly, it's a testament to the incredible power of a mother's will and the resilience of the human spirit. She was pushed to the absolute brink, only to discover a strength she never knew she possessed. Her journey from a billionaire's wife to a self-made survivor is an inspiration to anyone who has ever had to rebuild their life from the ashes. What did you think of Rosalind's incredible fight for justice? Let us know in the comments below. A single text message, just 2 words, arrives on the phone of a powerful CEO. "It's done." The message is from his wife, Annalise Thorne. Moments later, her phone goes dead, her social media vanishes, and she disappears from the face of the earth. For 3 agonizing weeks, her husband, Marcus Thorne, is grilled by police, vilified by the media, and haunted by the question, what was done? He thinks it's about their fractured marriage, a secret he's been keeping. He's wrong. On the 21st day of her disappearance, the answer arrives not from a detective, but from a press release. His billion-dollar company, Ethelred Innovations, has filed for catastrophic bankruptcy, and the trail of destruction leads directly back to his missing wife. Marcus Thorne lived his life at an altitude of 200 feet. Not just figuratively, as the CEO of Ethelred Innovations, a logistics and tech giant he'd built from the ground up, but literally. His office was the penthouse floor of the Thorne Tower in downtown Chicago, a monument of steel and smoked glass that speared the clouds. From here, the city was a silent, sprawling circuit board, and he was its master programmer. The world was a series of problems to be solved by capital code and ruthless efficiency. On Tuesday, October 15th, the world was humming along perfectly. Ethelred's stock was up 3 points. A lucrative government contract was in its final stages, and the autumn sun cast long golden shadows across his minimalist Italian desk. He was reviewing quarterly projections, the neat columns of black figures a comforting testament to his control, when his personal phone buzzed. He glanced at it, annoyed by the interruption. It was from Annalise. Just 2 words. "It's done." Marcus frowned. The message was stark devoid of the usual emojis or affectionate sign-offs she used even when she was annoyed with him. It was cold, clinical. Done. What was done? He mentally scrolled through their recent conversations. They'd had a fight that morning, a familiar circular argument about his work hours. He'd promised to be home early for dinner, a promise he was already planning to break. Was this her sarcastic confirmation? "Dinner is done and you're not here?" It felt more significant than that. He typed back a quick reply. "What's done? I'm in a meeting." A lie, but a necessary one to maintain the fiction of his indispensability. No response. He waited a minute, then another. The silence on the other end of the line felt unnervingly loud. He dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail, not even a single ring. The recorded message was her voice, warm and smooth like honey. "Hi, you've reached Annalise. Please leave a message and I'll get back to you soon." The cheerful normalcy of it was suddenly jarring. He tried her office line. Annalise wasn't just his wife. She was the COO of Ethelred, the organizational backbone to his visionary chaos. Her assistant, a young, perpetually flustered woman named Portia, answered. "Portia, is Annalise with you?" "No, Mr. Thorne. She left about an hour ago, said she had a personal errand to run." "Did she say where?" "No, sir. She just packed up her briefcase and left." She seemed very focused. Focused. Another strange word. Annalise was always composed, but focused implied a mission. Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He ended the call and tried her mobile again, straight to voicemail. He pulled up the Find My Phone app they shared. Her phone's location was a gray dot last seen an hour ago at her office. It was offline. Panic, a foreign and unwelcome emotion, began to prickle at the edges of his composure. This wasn't like her. Annalise was the most reliable person he knew. She was meticulous, a planner. She didn't just go offline. He spent the next 2 hours in a state of escalating anxiety, calling her number every 10 minutes, checking his email, his texts, even their shared social media accounts. Nothing. It was around 5 p.m., the city lights beginning to glitter below, that he noticed something else. Her Instagram, usually filled with artistic shots of architecture and pictures from their charity galas, was gone. Not private, but gone. A search for her name yielded a user not found error. Her Facebook profile had also vanished. It was as if she was digitally erasing herself. The knot in his stomach turned to a block of ice. This wasn't a dead battery or a forgotten phone. This was a deliberate act. He stood up his chair, scraping loudly in the silent office. The city lights blinked up at him, suddenly seeming less like a kingdom and more like a vast, indifferent wilderness. He called his driver. "Take me home, now." The ride to their Lincoln Park brownstone was a blur of traffic and dread. He kept replaying the 2 words in his head. It's done. It was a statement of finality. The end of something. Their marriage. Had she finally had enough? The thought was both terrifying and, in a deeply buried part of his heart, understandable. He had been a peripheral figure in their marriage for years, a provider of luxury but not of presence. He loved her, of course he did. But his first love, his true addiction, was the company. He burst through the front door of their meticulously decorated home. Annalise. The house was silent. Everything was in its place. The mail was stacked neatly on the hall table. A vase of white lilies, her favorite, sat on the marble countertop in the kitchen, their scent thick in the air. Nothing seemed amiss, yet the absence of her presence was a physical weight. He ran upstairs to their bedroom. Her closet was open. A section was empty. Not all of it, but a curated selection of her clothes was gone. Her travel suitcase was also missing. On her side of the bed, her jewelry box was open. The everyday pieces were there, but the truly valuable items, the diamond necklace he'd bought her for their 10th anniversary, her grandmother's emerald ring, were gone. On his pillow was a single plain white envelope. His name, Marcus, was written on it in her elegant, familiar script. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The divorce papers. The letter explaining everything. He tore it open with trembling hands. It was empty. Just a blank folded piece of high-quality stationery. A final baffling gesture. What did it mean that there was nothing left to say? That he was supposed to fill in the blanks himself? It was cruel. It was maddening. It was so unlike the direct, articulate woman he had married. He sank onto the bed, the empty envelope in his hand, the silence of the house pressing in on him. Annalise was gone. She had packed a bag, taken her most valuable possessions, sent a cryptic final message, and vanished. At 9:42 p.m., after calling every friend, every relative, every spa and hotel he could think of, Marcus Thorne, the man who controlled a global empire, did the one thing he never thought he'd do. He called the Chicago Police Department and reported his wife as a missing person. The call felt like a surrender, an admission that for the first time in his adult life, he was utterly and completely out of control. The first 48 hours were a procedural whirlwind that did little to calm Marcus's fraying nerves. 2 uniformed officers took his initial statement, their expressions a practiced blend of sympathy and professional detachment. They walked through the house, their heavy boots scuffing the polished hardwood floors, their presence a violation of the private sanctuary Annalise had so carefully curated. On the 3rd day, Detective Evelyn Reed arrived. She was a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and a no-nonsense demeanor that was immune to the aura of wealth and power that usually surrounded Marcus. She didn't seem impressed by the soaring ceilings or the abstract art on the walls. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice gravelly as she sat opposite him in his living room, refusing the offer of coffee. "Let's go over this one more time. Your wife, Annalise Thorne, age 41. She leaves her office Tuesday afternoon. Sends you a text message at 3:15 p.m. that says, 'It's done.' Then she disappears. You find some of her clothes and expensive jewelry missing, and an empty envelope on your pillow. Is that correct?" "Yes, that's all of it." Marcus was exhausted. He hadn't slept. He'd been fielding calls from his board of directors, from concerned friends, and now from the media who were starting to get wind of the story. "It's done," Reed repeated, tapping her pen on her notepad. "What do you think she meant by that?" "Mr. Thorne, I told you I think she was leaving me," he said, the admission tasting like ash in his mouth. "We'd been having problems." "What kind of problems?" Reed's gaze was unwavering. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "The usual. My work. I travel a lot. I'm not home as much as I should be." "Were there other people involved, on your side or hers?" "No," Marcus said a little too quickly. "Absolutely not. It was a lie. A partial one, at least. There had been no physical affair, but there was Corinne. Corinne was a junior analyst at Ethelred, bright, ambitious, and starstruck by him. Over the past 6 months, their late nights working on the government contract had bled into long conversations. He'd shared frustrations about his marriage. She'd listened with wide-eyed sympathy. There were lunches that felt a little too much like dates, texts that were a little too familiar. He'd been careless, seeking an ego boost, a distraction. He knew Annalise suspected something, though she never said it outright. There was a coolness that had settled between them, a distance that his work-life excuse couldn't fully explain. But he was sure Annalise had never had an affair. She was loyalty personified. Detective Reed seemed to sense the evasion. "We'll be looking at phone records, credit card statements, Mr. Thorne. Both yours and hers. If there's something to find, we'll find it. It's better if it comes from you." "There's nothing to find," he insisted, his tone hardening. The investigation ground on. Reed's team was thorough. They discovered that Annalise had withdrawn $50,000 in cash from their joint account on the morning she disappeared. A significant sum, but hardly enough to start a new life in luxury. It was enough, however, to fuel the narrative that she had left voluntarily. They also discovered that 6 weeks prior, Annalise had met with a high-profile divorce attorney, Beatrice Kent. When questioned, Kent cited attorney-client privilege but confirmed a consultation had taken place. The pieces were slotting into a neat, simple picture for the police. A wealthy, unhappy wife plans her escape from a workaholic, possibly unfaithful husband. By the end of the first week, the story had exploded in the press. Tech billionaire's wife vanishes after draining bank account. Marcus's face was everywhere, grim and unsmiling. Paparazzi camped outside his home and office. Ethelred's PR department went into overdrive, issuing statements about their concern for Annalise and their support for their CEO, but the damage was done. The stock, his barometer of success, dipped. Then it dipped further. Marcus felt trapped in a nightmare of his own making. His private life, which he had always guarded so fiercely, was now public spectacle. Every strained conversation, every missed dinner, was being re-examined through a lens of suspicion. He became a prisoner in his own home. The silence of the house a constant screaming reminder of Annalise's absence. He would walk into her study untouched since she left and see the book she was reading, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. It was torment. His business partner and CFO, Desmond Vance, tried to be a pillar of support. Desmond had been with him from the beginning. He was a steady, numbers-driven man who offset Marcus's impulsive genius. "Just focus on weathering this." Marcus Desmond set his hand on Marcus's shoulder during a tense meeting. The company needs you to be strong. We can handle the press. Just tell me, is there anything else that's going to come out? Any other surprises? Marcus thought of Corinne. No, he lied again to his oldest friend. There's nothing. He was a fool. The second week brought a seismic shift in the investigation, and it came as Marcus had feared in the form of Corinne. Detective Reed's team, armed with warrants, had pulled his phone records. The late-night texts, the frequent calls to a number not listed as a business contact, it didn't take a genius to connect the dots. Corinne was brought in for questioning. Terrified and weeping, she told them everything. She detailed the long conversations, the shared complaints, the undeniable emotional intimacy. She insisted it had never become physical, but she admitted that Marcus had spoken ill of his wife, that he'd called their marriage a gilded cage. When Detective Reed next confronted Marcus, her professional sympathy was gone, replaced by a cold prosecutorial focus. They were in a sterile interview room at the police precinct, a place Marcus had only ever seen in movies. A gilded cage, Mr. Thorne, Reed asked, sliding a transcript of Corinne's interview across the table. Doesn't sound like the usual problems you described to me. Marcus's blood ran cold. I was venting. It didn't mean anything. It means you lied to a police investigation. It means you have a motive. Your unhappy wife was about to leave you, likely taking half of your fortune with her. What did you do, Mr. Thorne? Did you have one last argument on Tuesday? Did things get out of hand? That's insane. Marcus shot to his feet. I did not harm my wife. I love my wife. Sit down. Reed's voice cracked like a whip. You love her so much you were having an emotional affair with a subordinate half your age. You love her so much you lied to the people trying to find her. Right now, Mr. Thorne, your story is the only one we have. And it's falling apart. The narrative had changed. He was no longer the worried husband. He was the cheating husband, the lying husband. And in the court of public opinion, he was quickly becoming the guilty husband. News outlets ran side-by-side photos of the beautiful, smiling Annalise and the young, tearful Corinne. The headlines were brutal CEO's secret affair, exposed as wife remains missing. Did Marcus Thorne's betrayal lead to foul play? The pressure was immense. Ethelred's board of directors called an emergency meeting. They stood by him for now, but their faces were grim. The government contract, once a sure thing, was suddenly on hold pending a review of the company's leadership stability. Marcus felt the empire he had built beginning to tremble. He was isolated. His friends called less frequently, their conversations strained and awkward. He was toxic. He hired a high-powered criminal defense attorney, a move that he knew made him look even more guilty, but one he had no choice but to make. He spent his nights alone in the cavernous house, drinking expensive scotch and staring at photos of Annalise. He saw her smile, the intelligent light in her eyes, and was overwhelmed by a tidal wave of regret. He had taken her for granted. He had been a fool, chasing the validation of the market and the thrill of the deal while the most valuable asset in his life was quietly slipping away. He'd thought the problem was her unhappiness with him. He had never once considered that the problem might be something else entirely. He started doing his own digging, fueled by desperation and insomnia. He accessed Annalise's work computer, her files. She was the COO. She had her hand in everything. He didn't know what he was looking for. A clue, a breadcrumb, anything. Her files were like her, impeccably organized. There were folders for operations logistics personnel, and one folder password protected named Valkyrie. He tried every password he could think of: her birthday, their anniversary, her mother's maiden name, the name of their first dog. Nothing worked. The file was a digital lockbox, and he didn't have the key. Whatever secret it held, she had taken it with her. The third week began. 20 days since he'd last seen her. The police were no closer to finding her. The media speculation had reached a fever pitch. Marcus Thorne was no longer a CEO. He was a character in a true crime drama, and everyone was waiting for the final damning act. He felt like he was standing on a precipice, the ground crumbling beneath his feet. He had no idea he was about to be pushed. On the morning of the 21st day, a Tuesday, exactly 3 weeks since Annalise's disappearance, Marcus was preparing for another grueling session with his lawyers when his phone rang. It was Desmond Vance, his CFO. His voice was strained, panicked. "Marcus, you need to get down to the office. Now. All hell has broken loose. What is it? What's happened?" "It's a liquidity crisis, a massive one. The banks are calling in our credit lines. They're saying we've defaulted on our covenants. I don't understand the numbers, Marcus. They're not adding up." Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline cut through his exhausted haze. This was his territory. A financial crisis was a problem he could understand, a dragon he could slay. "I'm on my way." When he walked into the Ethelred boardroom, the atmosphere was funereal. The entire executive board was present, their faces pale. Desmond stood at the head of the table, his tie loose and sweating despite the cool temperature of the room. He was pointing at a series of complex spreadsheets projected onto a large screen. "It happened overnight," Desmond explained, his voice trembling. "A series of offshore transfers were triggered. Huge sums, Marcus. Hundreds of millions of dollars moved from our primary reserve accounts to an untraceable shell corporation in the Cayman Islands." Marcus stared at the screen, his mind racing to catch up. "Who authorized the transfers? That requires dual sign-off. Mine and—" He trailed off, the blood draining from his face. "And Annalise's," Desmond finished, his voice barely a whisper. "Her digital signature was used. The transfers were initiated from her encrypted work laptop at 3:45 p.m. 3 weeks ago, right after she left the office." The room fell silent. The date, the time, it was all clicking into place with sickening clarity. The text message. "It's done." It wasn't about their marriage. It wasn't about dinner. It was about this. She had gutted the company. The transfer triggered an immediate automated audit by our lenders, Desmond continued, his voice regaining some strength as he slipped into the role of the bearer of bad news. "They found irregularities, discrepancies in our asset valuations going back years, over-leveraged positions, inflated revenue projections. The house of cards just fell." Marcus was reeling. "Inflated projections? That's not possible. You and I review the financials every month." Desmond looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "The numbers I saw were solid. The numbers the banks saw, they tell a different story. It looks like we've been running on fumes for years, using new investments to cover old debts. A classic Ponzi scheme." A murmur of shock went through the room. A Ponzi scheme. Ethelred Innovations was his life's work, a legitimate, profitable enterprise. "This is a mistake," Marcus said, his voice shaking with rage. "Someone has manipulated the books. Someone framed us." One of the board members, an old hawk-faced man named Alistair Finch, spoke up. "The person who framed us appears to be your wife, Marcus. She initiated the final fatal transfer, and then she vanished. It looks like she took the money and ran, exposing the rod as she went." The logic was undeniable, yet it made no sense. Why would Annalise do this to ruin him? It was beyond vengeance. It was scorched earth destruction. It would destroy her own reputation, make her an international fugitive. It was illogical. It was insane. Before he could argue further, his corporate lawyer burst into the room. "We have a problem. The SEC has just announced they are launching a formal investigation into Ethelred for securities fraud. They're on their way here with a warrant to seize all our servers." The final nail in the coffin. That afternoon, under the advice of a battalion of lawyers, Ethelred Innovations, the titan of industry, the symbol of Marcus Thorne's success, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The news hit the wires like a thunderclap. The stock plummeted to zero in after-hours trading. The company he had spent 20 years building was gone in a single day. The media narrative, already hostile, became venomous. It was a story too perfect to resist the cheating CEO and his scorned, brilliant wife, who in a final act of revenge stole a fortune and burned his empire to the ground on her way out the door. Marcus Thorne was no longer just a suspect in his wife's disappearance. He was the villain of a grand corporate tragedy, a fraudster whose personal sins had led to financial ruin for thousands of employees and investors. He watched the news that night from the floor of his empty living room, a bottle of scotch, his only companion. His face was plastered on every channel. Pundits dissected his downfall with gleeful schadenfreude. His company was bankrupt. His reputation was destroyed. He was the subject of a federal investigation. He had lost everything. And it was all because of Annalise. The hatred he felt was pure and searing. How could she do this? He stumbled through the house in a drunken rage, wanting to smash something, to destroy something the way she had destroyed him. He ended up in her study, the one room he'd avoided. He swept his arm across her desk, sending papers, pens, and a framed photo of the two of them smiling on a beach in Italy, crashing to the floor. As he stared at the wreckage, his eye caught something. Underneath the heavy desk blotter where it had been hidden was a small silver key. It was a key he recognized. It belonged to the small fireproof safe hidden behind a false panel in the wall, the one where they kept their passports and important documents. With a surge of desperate hope, he pried open the panel and unlocked the safe. Inside were their passports, some emergency cash, and a thick sealed manila envelope. On the front, in Annalise's handwriting, were the words, "For Marcus. When it's all gone." His hands shaking so badly he could barely function, he ripped it open. It wasn't money. It was a stack of papers and a single USB stick. On top was a handwritten letter. He began to read. "My dearest Marcus, if you are reading this, it means I have failed. Or perhaps it means I have succeeded. By now the company is gone. Your name is mud. You hate me. And the entire world is telling you that you are right to. Please, before you believe, then believe me. Read what is in this envelope. Look at the drive. And understand that everything I did to save you." Part 5. The Valkyrie's Gambit. Marcus sank to the floor, the letter trembling in his hand. The words made no sense. Save you? She had annihilated him. He read on his mind, struggling to process the elegant looping script that was so at odds with the chaos she had unleashed. "For 2 years, my love, you have been blind. You saw only the stock price, the next contract, the view from your tower. You didn't see the rot spreading through the foundations of the very thing you built. I tried to tell you. I tried to show you the small inconsistencies in the quarterly reports, the numbers that felt slick, too perfect. 2. You told me I was being overly cautious. You told me to trust Desmond." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Desmond. His friend, his partner, the man who had stood by his side, feigning panic in the boardroom. Desmond has been stealing from you, from the company, for at least 5 years. Not in large, obvious amounts, but a slow, methodical bleed. He's a genius, I'll give him that. He created a shadow accounting system, a ghost ledger that mirrored our own, but with tiny fractional alterations. He siphoned money into a web of shell corporations so complex it would take a team of forensic accountants a year to unravel. But the hole was getting bigger. The company wasn't as healthy as you thought. We were leveraged to the hilt based on asset valuations that Desmond had been carefully inflating for years. Marcus's head swam. He grabbed the stack of papers from the envelope. They were printouts of spreadsheets, flowcharts of transactions, copies of documents. It was meticulous. It was damning. He saw account numbers, dates, names of shell companies, Njord Holdings, Freya Investments. It was all there. Annalise had been running her own secret parallel investigation for months. The password-protected folder on her computer, Valkyrie, must have been her name for the operation. In Norse mythology, a Valkyrie chose who would die in battle and who would live. He continued reading the letter. I confronted him 6 weeks ago. I showed him a fraction of the proof I had gathered. I thought he would confess that we could handle it internally, save the company, and avoid scandal. I was naive. He didn't confess. He laughed. He told me it was too late. He said he had built a fail-safe. He had structured the fraud in such a way that the ultimate liability, the cooked books, the fraudulent valuations sent to the banks and the SEC, all had your digital signature on them. He had been carefully manipulating the documents you signed for years, attaching your digital credentials to fraudulent reports. He showed me. If the company went down, you wouldn't just be ruined, Marcus. You would go to prison for 20 years. He told me he was the victim of a loyal CFO who had been deceived by his charismatic, reckless CEO. The cold, calculated evil of it was breathtaking. Desmond had been setting him up for years, building a cage around him while smiling to his face. He gave me an ultimatum. The letter went on. Keep my mouth shut or he would trigger the collapse himself. Bury you and disappear with the millions he had already stolen. I was trapped. Going to the authorities meant sending you to jail. Doing nothing meant the same result just on his timeline. I needed another way. A third option. A way to burn the whole rotten structure down, but in a way that would ultimately exonerate you. Marcus looked at the USB stick. He scrambled to her desk, found her laptop, and plugged it in. The drive contained a single file, a screen recording. He double-clicked it. It was a video of Annalise's computer screen recorded on the day she disappeared. It showed her logging into the company's high-level financial systems. It showed her accessing the account for the Cayman Islands Shell Corporation. And then it showed her initiating the transfer of $300 million. The mouse moved with a steady, deliberate hand. But the audio was the crucial part. It was a recording of a phone call placed on speaker. Desmond's voice, slick and confident, filled the room. So you're really going to do it. You're going to pull the pin on the grenade and hold on to it yourself. Bold move, Annalise. Very dramatic. Annalise's voice was calm, icy. You left me no choice, Desmond. You built a trap for Marcus. I'm just building a different one for you. This won't work, Desmond sneered. This just makes you look like a common thief. You transfer the money, you disappear. Everyone will think you and Marcus had a falling out and you decided to take revenge. It's perfect. It still buries him in the fraud and I get away clean. You're wrong, Annalise said. My transfer is clumsy. It's noisy. A single massive unauthorized transfer from my credentials to a brand new shell company. It's the work of a panicking amateur, not a master fraudster. It screams, stolen money. Your fraud, Desmond, the one you were going to use to frame Marcus, is subtle, complex, years in the making. When the forensic accountants come in, and my transfer ensures they will come in with a vengeance, they will find two things. They will find my loud, messy crime. But as they dig deeper to see how this was possible, they will inevitably find your quiet, brilliant one. They will see the ghost ledger. They will see the inflated assets. And they will see that the two crimes don't match. My act creates a breadcrumb trail that will lead them directly to you. There was a pause on the recording. Desmond's confidence seemed to waver. You're bluffing. Am I? Annalise said. I'm about to become one of the most wanted white-collar criminals in the world. I'm about to give up my life, my home, my name. My husband will hate me. The world will think I'm a monster. What reason would I have to bluff? This was the only way. To burn the company to the ground before you could, to force a bankruptcy on my terms, not yours. This way there's a chance the truth will come out. Your way there was none. Marcus heard a click on the recording as she executed the transfer. It's done. Annalise said, her voice soft but final. Then she hung up. Marcus stared at the screen, tears streaming down his face. It's done. The text message. It wasn't an accusation. It was a declaration of sacrifice. Marcus sat on the floor of the study, the letter in his hands, the world tilting on its axis. The words on the page were a key, unlocking a truth so monstrous and heartbreaking that his mind struggled to grasp it. He read the final part of the letter not as a quick explanation, but as a slow, deliberate confession of love disguised as a crime. I had to disappear. Marcus. The letter continued, Annalise's script flawless, even in her presumed haste. The plan, my Valkyrie's gambit, was only ever going to work if my crime looked real. It needed to be selfish, emotional, and brutal. A scorned wife taking her pound of flesh. If I stayed, if I tried to explain, Desmond would have used his army of lawyers to discredit me, to paint me as a disgruntled, hysterical woman, or worse, your co-conspirator in the fraud. He would have drowned the truth in a sea of litigation and lies. My vanishing is the key. The missing wife, the stolen money, it's a simple, compelling story that the police and the media would latch onto. And they did. The narrative had to be about my greed, not Desmond's. It had to be about our broken marriage, not his calculated betrayal. That cloud of scandal, as painful as I knew it would be for you, was the only thing that could obscure the path I was really on. It bought the time needed for the real investigation, the one I am now entrusting to you to begin. So I played the part. I took the cash from our account enough to look like escape money, but not so much as to be untraceable. I took the jewelry you gave me, each piece a memory I had to weaponize, leaving the empty envelope on your pillow. That was perhaps the cruelest part. I needed you to be confused. I needed you to be angry. I needed your performance as the wronged, bewildered husband to be genuine, because I knew they would be watching your every move. I am so sorry for that particular cruelty, my love. Forcing you into that role is a sin I will carry with me always. I have been watching the news from a series of anonymous hotel rooms using untraceable Wi-Fi. I have seen what they're saying about you, what they have made you into. Each headline, each pundit speculating on your guilt has been a knife in my heart. Every day for the last 3 weeks has been a special kind of hell, knowing I was the architect of your public humiliation. But it was necessary. You had to be the victim of my crime, so you wouldn't be the perpetrator of his. I pray you can see that now. This evidence is your weapon. The USB drive contains the recording of my final call with Desmond. It is his confession, his arrogance, his undoing. The documents in this envelope are just the beginning of the trail. I uncovered the tip of the fraudulent iceberg. Do not take this to your corporate lawyers or the board. They are compromised, worried only about their own liability and golden parachutes. They will bury it to mitigate their own losses. You must give it to someone who is looking for the truth, not just a convenient narrative. Give it to the detective. The woman with the sharp eyes, Detective Reed. She doesn't like you. In all the news clips, I see the way she looks at you. She doesn't trust you. And that Marcus is why you must trust her. She isn't impressed by your money or your tower. She is hunting for the real story, and I have just handed you the script. I don't know what will happen to me now. I am a ghost. The money I transferred is sitting in an account that I will never touch. Its only purpose was to trigger the alarms. The cash I took will allow me to live for a while, moving from place to place, always looking over my shoulder. Perhaps one day, when this is all over, when your name is cleared and Desmond is where he belongs, I can find a way to come home. But I have accepted that I may not be able to. I am now Annalise Thorne, international fugitive. There may be no coming back from that. I destroyed Ethelred Innovations, the company that you loved more than anything. I know that. But I did it to save Marcus Thorne, the man I still love more than the life I just threw away. You were lost in that glass tower, my love. You were so busy conquering the world you didn't see the enemy in your own throne room. Maybe losing the kingdom is the only way to find yourself again. Don't look for me. It's too dangerous. Clear your name. And then please live. Live freely and fully. That is all I ask. Forever yours. Annalise Marcus. Let the letter fall from his numb fingers. The silence of the study pressed in thick and suffocating. He wasn't a victim of her betrayal. He was the subject of her masterpiece, a brutal, brilliant, agonizing work of art painted with the ruin of their lives. The searing hatred he had harbored for 3 weeks curdled and collapsed inward, transforming into a profound, gut-wrenching shame that bent him in two. He choked back a sob, the sound raw and ugly in the quiet room. While he had been drinking himself into a stupor, cursing her name, she had been in hiding alone, watching him on a flickering screen, praying her insane gambit would work. While he had been mourning his company, she had been mourning their entire existence. His mind suddenly cruelly replayed a highlight reel of his own failures. A flash of memory, Annalise 2 years ago, pointing at a quarterly report on his desk. This number for accounts receivable seems high, Marcus. It's grown faster than our revenue. He remembered patting her hand dismissively. Don't worry about it. It's just aggressive accounting. Desmond is a wizard with this stuff. Another memory, their last anniversary. She had booked a table at their favorite French restaurant. He'd canceled at the last minute. I'm so sorry, honey. This government deal is at a critical stage. Desmond and I have to pull an all-nighter. He hadn't been with Desmond. He'd been having drinks with Corinne, soaking in her admiration, because it was easier than facing the quiet disappointment in his own wife's eyes. Each memory was a fresh stab of guilt. He had been arrogant, complacent, and blind. He had outsourced his trust to Desmond and his heart to his work, leaving Annalise with the scraps. And in his blindness she had been forced to see for the both of them to fight a war he didn't even know was being waged. He stumbled to his feet, his body aching but his mind blazing with a new terrible clarity. The despair of the last 3 weeks, the self-pity, it was all burned away by a cold, hard resolve. Annalise had sacrificed her queen to save a foolish king. She had passed him the torch from across a chasm of her own making. It was his turn to carry it. He walked out of the study and into the living room past the half-empty bottle of scotch on the coffee table. He picked it up, walked it to the kitchen sink, and poured the amber liquid down the drain. The glugging sound a final mournful goodbye to the man he had been. He washed his face with cold water, staring at his reflection in the mirror above the sink. The face staring back was no longer the titan of industry. It was the face of a man who had lost everything, a fool who had been saved by the woman he had so thoroughly neglected. He dried his face, his movements now precise and purposeful. The fog had lifted. Annalise had given him his mission. He would not fail her again. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over his lawyer's number for a split second before dismissing it. Annalise was right. This was not a legal problem anymore. This was a matter of justice. He scrolled through his recent calls past the names of board members and concerned but distant friends until he found the one he was looking for. He pressed the call button for Detective Evelyn Reed. "Detective Reed," he said when she answered, his voice devoid of the arrogance or desperation she was used to. It was steady, calm, and weighted with absolute conviction. "It's Marcus Thorne. We need to talk. Immediately. I know what happened to my wife, and I can prove who is responsible for every last bit of this." Detective Reed agreed to meet him, but not at the precinct. She chose a neutral location, a small anonymous coffee shop in a neighborhood far from the gleaming towers of downtown. She was skeptical, her expression hardened by 3 weeks of what she believed were his lies. Marcus didn't waste time with pleasantries. He placed the manila envelope on the table between them. "Before you say anything, just read this. And watch this." He slid her laptop, which he'd brought across the table with the USB stick already in it. Reed hesitated, her eyes searching his for any sign of deception. She saw only a raw, weary grief and a steely determination she hadn't seen before. Intrigued, she opened the letter and began to read. Marcus watched as her expression shifted from hardened skepticism to deep concentration, then to shock. She read the letter twice, then wordlessly played the video file. The coffee shop faded away as the recorded voices of Annalise and Desmond filled the small space around their table. Reed listened intently, her head cocked. She heard Desmond's arrogant admission. She heard Annalise's calm, calculated explanation of her own plan. She heard the final chilling words, "It's done." When the recording finished, Reed was silent for a full minute, her gaze distant. She looked from the laptop back to Marcus. The suspicion in her eyes was gone, replaced by a dawning grudging respect. "My God," she breathed. "She built a better case against him than my entire department has in 3 weeks. She immolated herself to light him up. She sacrificed everything Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, on the belief that you would be smart enough to see the real pattern." Reed closed the laptop. She was all business now. "This recording the documents, this changes everything. This isn't just evidence of financial fraud. It's extortion. It establishes a clear motive for why she would stage her own disappearance. It shifts the entire focus of the investigation." The next few hours were a blur of coordinated action. Reed understood the stakes. Desmond couldn't be tipped off. She brought in a trusted team from the Financial Crimes Unit and a prosecutor from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Marcus gave them a sworn statement detailing everything, holding nothing back, including his own failings as a husband and his foolish blind trust in Desmond. Armed with the new evidence and a new set of warrants, federal agents and Chicago police descended on two locations simultaneously: Desmond Vance's penthouse apartment and his secluded office at the now-defunct Ethelred headquarters. They found him in his office shredding documents. He had likely been spooked by Marcus's summons from Reed. When he saw the agents, he attempted to feign surprise, but the mask slipped when Reed played a portion of the audio recording for him. The color drained from his face. He knew he was caught. In his apartment, they found hard drives containing the ghost ledgers and evidence of the millions he had siphoned away, exactly as Annalise had predicted. The arrest of Desmond Vance was the new lead story. The narrative turned on a dime. The tale of the vengeful wife was replaced by the even more sensational story of the treacherous partner and the wife who engineered a multi-million-dollar corporate implosion as a brilliant, desperate act of sacrifice to save her husband. Marcus Thorne was no longer the villain. He was cleared of involvement in the fraud. The media, in its relentless way, now painted him as a tragic figure, a man betrayed by his best friend and saved by his estranged wife. But Marcus ignored the noise. The court of public opinion meant nothing to him anymore. The legal battles would be long and arduous. Investors sued. Employees launched class action lawsuits. The bankruptcy proceedings would take years to untangle. But Marcus was free. His name was cleared. Ethelred Innovations was dead, but he was alive. Weeks later, after the initial storm had passed, he was sitting in the quiet of his now-sold Lincoln Park home, packing the last of his personal belongings into boxes. He was broke, his fortune tied up in litigation, but he felt lighter than he had in years. A plain, prepaid burner phone he had bought buzzed on the table. It was a number he didn't recognize from a country code he couldn't place. He answered, his heart pounding. A text message appeared on the screen. It wasn't 2 words, but 3. "You are free." Then a second message came through. It was a single image. A picture of a quiet beach at dawn, the waves gently lapping the shore. It was a place he didn't recognize, somewhere peaceful and anonymous. There was no one in the photo, but he knew she was there. It was her way of telling him she was safe. And it was her way of saying goodbye for now. He typed back a single word. "Thank you." He didn't know if she would ever come back. He didn't know if their marriage could ever be rebuilt from the ashes. He had lost his company, his fortune, and his wife. But in losing everything, he had been given a second chance. He looked out the window, not at a skyline he owned, but at a world of unknown possibilities. Annalise had saved his life. Now it was time to finally start living it. What an incredible story of sacrifice and deception. Annalise Thorne made a choice that most of us can barely comprehend to destroy her own life, her reputation, and the empire she helped build. All for the slim chance of saving the man she loved from a trap he couldn't see. It forces us to ask some difficult questions. Is a love that requires such a devastating sacrifice truly a healthy one? Or is it the ultimate expression of devotion? Marcus Thorne lost his fortune but regained his soul. But Annalise remains a fugitive, a ghost in the system she expertly manipulated. What do you think? Was Annalise a hero, or was her solution as destructive as the problem she was trying to solve? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This story is a powerful reminder that behind the headlines and financial reports, there are always human hearts with their own complex and often desperate plans.